What if the past isn't finished with us? Beneath the dust of centuries lie moments that refuse to stay silent. Events half buried, truths fractured, questions unanswered. Empires rose and fell, people vanished without a trace, and discoveries surfaced that challenged everything humanity thought it knew. These are not legends. They are real incidents, recorded in ink and stone, yet still cloaked in shadow. Who was responsible? What was concealed? And why? Tonight, we step into the echoing corridors of time, where history grows darker the deeper you look. So sit back, steady your curiosity, and let's descend into 3 hours of history's darkest mysteries. The valley is quiet, even now. Moss clings to stone, mist drifts low between the trees, and the wind moves through the rocks as if carrying unfinished thoughts. In Isdal, not far from Bergen, hikers once called this place Death Valley, a name earned long before anyone understood why. In late November 1970, the stillness was broken by a discovery that would unsettle Norway for decades to come. A father and his 2 daughters stumbled upon a burned body lying among the rocks. The woman had no identification. Her clothes were partially scorched, her face unrecognizable. Nearby lay personal items arranged with strange care: jewelry, a bottle of liquor, burned paper. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic but isolated death. Yet, from the very beginning, nothing about the scene felt ordinary. The autopsy revealed unsettling details. The woman had ingested a lethal dose of sleeping pills, yet traces of soot in her lungs suggested she was still breathing as the fire took hold. Her fingerprints had been deliberately altered. Labels were cut from her clothing. Even her dental work hinted at a life spent moving between countries, though no records could confirm where she came from. Authorities would come to know her only by a name taken from the place she died: the Isdal Woman. As investigators retraced her final months, the mystery deepened. Hotel records showed she had traveled across Europe under multiple aliases, checking in and out of rooms with carefully chosen false names. Witnesses recalled her as reserved, well-dressed, and multilingual. She paid in cash, avoided conversation, and frequently changed rooms. Why would someone live so deliberately unseen? The official conclusion leaned toward suicide. The pills, the fire, the isolation of the valley, it all fit, at least on paper. Perhaps she was a troubled traveler, burdened by personal struggles no one ever knew. But questions lingered. Why erase her identity so completely? Why the coded notes found among her belongings? Why the careful destruction of labels, as if anonymity itself were the goal? Over time, alternative theories emerged. Some suggested espionage, pointing to the Cold War tensions of the era and her habit of moving near military installations. Others wondered if she was involved in smuggling, intelligence gathering, or something even less defined, an operative who slipped through borders as easily as names. There were also quieter, more human speculations, that she was fleeing an abusive past or protecting someone she loved by ensuring she could never be traced. None of these explanations fully resolve the contradictions. Each theory explains one piece, while leaving others untouched. Decades later, advances in forensic science would offer brief hope. Isotope testing suggested where she might have grown up. Facial reconstructions attempted to give her back a face. Yet no name has ever surfaced with certainty, and no family has come forward. The Isdal Woman remains suspended between fact and silence, a person documented in fragments, defined more by absence than by presence. She walked through crowded streets, slept in ordinary hotel rooms, and vanished into a valley that keeps its secrets well. Was she hiding from the world, or was the world never meant to find her at all? Even now, the question lingers in the cold air of Isdalen, unanswered, waiting. Mysteries have just beginning to rise over Somerton Beach on December 1st, 1948. A man lay slumped against a seawall, his legs outstretched, his polished shoes crossed neatly at the ankles. To passing joggers, he appeared to be sleeping, perhaps drunk, perhaps exhausted from the night before. Only later would it become clear that he had been dead for hours, possibly longer. There were no signs of violence, no disturbance in the sand, no obvious cause of death. Just a man in a suit, facing the sea. Authorities soon discovered how carefully constructed his anonymity was. The labels had been removed from every piece of clothing. No wallet, no identification, no personal letters. His pockets contained only mundane items: a bus ticket, a train ticket unused, a comb, matches, chewing gum. Nothing that explained who he was or why he had ended his life, or lost it, on this particular beach outside Adelaide. The autopsy raised more questions than it answered. The man was fit, well-nourished, and appeared to be in good health. Yet his internal organs showed signs consistent with poisoning, though no known toxin could be identified. His stomach contained traces of blood, his spleen was unusually enlarged, and his heart appeared normal. The coroner could not determine a cause of death. The case stalled almost as soon as it began. Then came the detail that would transform a puzzling death into one of the most enduring enigmas of the 20th century. Hidden in a small sewn pocket of the man's trousers was a tightly rolled scrap of paper. On it were 2 words, printed cleanly in block letters: Tamam Shud. The phrase was soon traced to Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, where it translates roughly to ended or finished. The implication was unsettling. Was it a final message, a philosophical statement, or simply a marker pointing investigators toward something else entirely? Police eventually located a copy of the Rubaiyat discarded in the back seat of a nearby car. One page had been torn out, the very page containing the words Tamam Shud. Inside the book's back cover was a penciled sequence of letters arranged in lines, resembling a cipher. There was also a phone number traced to a nurse who lived not far from the beach. When questioned, she claimed not to know the man, though witnesses later suggested her reaction hinted at something more complicated. Once again, certainty slipped just out of reach. The mainstream explanations remained grounded. Perhaps the Somerton man was a troubled individual who chose the beach as a quiet place to die. Maybe the code was nothing more than a private mnemonic, the book a coincidence. Poisoning, accidental or intentional, remained the most widely accepted theory, even if the poison itself could not be named. In the context of post-war Australia, these explanations were plausible, if incomplete. But incompleteness invites speculation. The late 1940s were defined by shifting alliances and deepening mistrust. Some investigators and historians noted that Woomera, a top-secret military installation, was active during this period, not far inland from Adelaide. The anonymous clothing, the coded message, the untraceable identity. To some, these details resembled the tools of espionage. The Rubaiyat itself, a book of poetry known and loved across cultures, might have served as an unlikely but effective concealment device. Other theories moved in quieter directions. The nurse whose number was found in the book had once given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a soldier during the war. Could the Somerton man have been that soldier, returning years later, unseen and unrecognized? Or was that connection merely coincidence? Another narrative thread tempting but unprovable. In recent decades, science has reopened the case without resolving it. Advances in forensic genealogy suggested a possible family line, hinting that the Somerton man may have been born in Australia, not abroad as once assumed. Facial reconstructions offered new ways to look at him, not as a cipher or a symbol, but as a human being. Yet even with DNA, records, and renewed interest, the most basic questions persist. Why erase every trace of identity? Why leave behind a fragment of poetry that speaks of endings, but explains nothing? And why choose that precise place between land and sea to disappear? Like the Isdal woman before him, the Somerton man exists in the spaces between he knew. In these narratives, YOGTZE becomes less a puzzle to be solved and more a fragment torn from a larger, unseen context. There are also interpretations that remain purely symbolic. The word could represent a moment of perceived clarity, a delusion that briefly crystallized into language before dissolving again. If so, the tragedy lies not in hidden conspiracies, but in the quiet devastation of a mind losing its footing while the world continues indifferent. Decades later, the YOGTZE case resists resolution not through complexity but through absence. No witnesses to the crucial moments, no physical evidence pointing decisively in one direction, only a handful of statements, a missing set of clothes, and a word that refuses to explain itself. Like the other mysteries before it, this story unfolds at the edge of comprehension. It asks whether meaning must always exist, or whether sometimes we are left only with traces, symbols that feel important without revealing why. Was YOGTZE a key, a warning, or a coincidence elevated by tragedy? As traffic continues to flow along the A45, and years pass without answers, the question remains suspended. What did Gunther Stoll realize that night? And did anyone else understand it too? From coded words scribbled in ink and unanswered final moments on a roadside, the path now leads further back in time, into a rural silence where isolation itself may have been the most dangerous presence. This mystery does not unfold in motion, but in stillness, among fields, footprints, and a farmhouse that seemed to watch its inhabitants long after they were gone. The farm lay just beyond the small hamlet of Hinterkaifeck, surrounded by dense woodland and open fields in southern Germany. In the early spring of 1922, the land was thawing, but winter still lingered in the air. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. Animals remained unfed. Something, neighbors sensed, was wrong. When they finally approached the property, what they discovered would become one of the most chilling unsolved crimes in European history. 6 people lay dead. The victims were members of the Gruber family, Andreas and Kazelia Gruber, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, her 2 young children, and a newly arrived maid. All had been killed with a mattock, a farming tool, likely lured one by one into the barn before being struck. The maid, who had arrived only hours earlier, was found inside the house, suggesting she may not have even known the family long enough to sense danger. The brutality was shocking, but it was the details surrounding the murders that disturbed investigators most. Days before the killings, Andreas Gruber had reported finding footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the farm, but none leading back. He heard footsteps in the attic. Tools went missing, then reappeared. A newspaper arrived that no one in the household subscribed to. Despite these warnings, no one left the farm. No one came to help. Even more unsettling was what appeared to happen after the murders. Evidence suggested the killer remained on the property for several days. The cattle were fed. Meals were prepared. A fire was kept burning. Someone moved freely through the house, as if continuing a routine that no longer belonged to anyone alive. The discovery of the bodies prompted an immediate investigation, but from the beginning, it was plagued by missteps. The crime scene was trampled by curious villagers. Evidence was handled carelessly. The farmhouse itself was later demolished, erasing any chance of future forensic analysis. What remained were testimonies, rumors, and contradictions. Mainstream theories focused on motives rooted in family conflict or robbery. Andreas Gruber was known to be domineering and deeply disliked. He had been accused and convicted of incest with his daughter Victoria years earlier, a scandal that isolated the family from the community. Could someone have sought revenge? Or was it a personal dispute that escalated into violence? Robbery, however, seemed unlikely. Money and valuables were left untouched. If the motive was financial, it was poorly executed. That contradiction opened the door to darker possibilities. One of the earliest suspects was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who had previously been romantically involved with Victoria and was rumored to be the father of her youngest child. His behavior after the discovery raised eyebrows. He reportedly entered the house alone, knew details he should not have known, and appeared disturbingly calm. Yet no definitive evidence ever linked him to the crime, and he denied involvement until his death. Other theories pointed outward rather than inward. Some suggested a transient laborer or former maid, familiar with the property, returned unnoticed. Others speculated about deserters from the aftermath of World War I, men hardened by violence, drifting through rural areas without documentation or accountability. In this context, Hinterkaifeck becomes not just a family tragedy, but a reflection of a society still fractured by war. More fringe interpretations have persisted quietly over the decades. Could the killer have been living in the attic for days, or weeks, before the murders, watching the family unnoticed? The footprints, the sounds, the missing tools all seem to hint at prolonged surveillance. The idea is unsettling, but not entirely implausible in an isolated farm surrounded by forest. There are also suggestions that the case was deliberately obscured, that local authorities, overwhelmed or compromised, allowed key details to fade. Records were lost. Witnesses contradicted one another. Leads were abandoned. Over time, the mystery hardened into legend, while answers slipped away. What makes the Hinterkaifeck murders particularly haunting is their intimacy. This was not a random act carried out and forgotten. Whoever committed the crime knew the rhythms of the farm. They knew where to stand, when to strike, and how to remain unseen. And after it was done, they stayed. Today, the farm no longer exists. A small memorial marks the spot where the house once stood. The fields have returned to quiet purpose, worked and reworked by generations who know the story but cannot explain it. No names have been conclusively tied to the crime. No confession has ever surfaced. Like the mysteries before it, Hinterkaifeck resists resolution not because of spectacle, but because of what is missing. The killer vanished. The motive dissolved. The evidence was swallowed by time. And yet, the unease remains, lingering in the idea that sometimes the most terrifying threats are not sudden or visible, but patient, familiar, and already inside the walls. So the question endures, whispered rather than asked outright. Who walked those floors after the family lay dead? And how did they disappear so completely into history? From a farmhouse swallowed by silence, the story moves across an ocean and forward in time to a small American town where the glow of Christmas lights once reflected off fresh snow and where a single night would fracture a family forever. This mystery does not begin with isolation, but with warmth, tradition, and a house filled with children. The home stood on the outskirts of Fayetteville, perched above a quiet road in the Appalachian Hills. In the early hours of Christmas Day, 1945, the Sodder house was still and dark, the remnants of celebration lingering in the air. Inside slept George and Jenny Sodder, along with their 10 children, safe as far as anyone knew. Shortly after 1 a.m., Jenny awoke to the smell of smoke. Flames had already taken hold of the roof. George leapt from bed, shouting for the children. As the fire spread rapidly through the wooden structure, chaos replaced calm. 5 of the children, George Jr., Jenny, Sylvia, John, and Betty, were seen escaping the house. But 5 others did not respond to calls: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny Irene, and Betty. Within minutes, the house was engulfed. The fire burned so hot that it collapsed the roof and reduced the home to ashes before help could arrive. By morning, the Sodders were left standing before a blackened foundation, stunned by loss. Authorities concluded that the 5 missing children had perished in the blaze. Yet, as the ashes cooled and the site was examined, something unsettling became apparent. No remains were found, no bones, no teeth, no fragments that could be conclusively identified as human. Fire officials suggested the intensity of the blaze had destroyed all physical evidence. But cremation experts quietly questioned that explanation. Even in severe house fires, bone fragments are typically recovered. Here, there was nothing. Doubt began almost immediately. In the days leading up to the fire, the family had received strange phone calls that abruptly ended when Jenny answered. On Christmas Eve, a woman visited the house, commenting oddly that the Sodder children were too beautiful to die. That same night, George noticed that the family's ladder, normally kept against the house, was missing. The telephone line had been cut. The family's truck, which George attempted to use to reach the attic window, refused to start, despite working perfectly the day before. Officially, the fire was ruled an accident, blamed on faulty wiring. Yet George Sodder, a meticulous businessman, rejected that conclusion. He knew the wiring had recently passed inspection. And more troubling still, he had been an outspoken critic of Italian fascism in his community, a stance that had earned him threats in the past. Could the fire have been deliberate? As the years passed, sightings were reported. A waitress in Charleston claimed to have served several Sodder children weeks after the fire. A woman in St. Louis reported seeing children matching their descriptions traveling with unfamiliar adults. Another account placed them in New York City, spotted through the window of a hotel. Each lead dissolved before it could be confirmed. Yet the Sodders refused to let the case fade. George and Jenny erected a large billboard along Route 60, displaying photographs of the missing children and offering a reward for information. It would remain there for decades, a quiet accusation aimed at the passing world. They corresponded with investigators, politicians, and even the Federal Bureau of Investigation, though jurisdictional limits prevented a full federal inquiry. More speculative theories began to circulate, carefully, without certainty. One suggested that the children had been abducted by individuals connected to organized crime, possibly as retaliation for George's political views. Another proposed that the children had been secretly taken to Italy, absorbed into another family, their identities deliberately erased. In these narratives, the fire becomes a cover, destruction engineered not to kill, but to convince. Then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, the family received an anonymous letter postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his early 20s. On the back were handwritten words. Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie. Ill boys, a 90132. The resemblance to the missing Louis was striking. Handwriting experts could not determine the author. Attempts to locate the man in the photo led nowhere. Still, the Sodders held on. Mainstream explanations remain grounded in tragedy. It is possible, some argue, that the children did die in the fire, their remains overlooked or destroyed in ways not fully understood at the time. Early investigative errors, lack of forensic rigor, and emotional investment may have allowed doubt to grow unchecked. In this view, the mystery is less about conspiracy and more about a family's refusal to accept an unbearable loss. But even this explanation struggles under scrutiny. Too many details resist dismissal. Too many small failures align too neatly. And the absence of physical evidence remains difficult to ignore. Jenny Sodder wore black for the rest of her life. George died still searching. The billboard eventually came down, weathered by decades of sun and rain, but the question it posed never disappeared. If the children died that night, where did they go? And if they lived, if they were carried out of the fire and into another life, did they remember the sound of their names, called into the flames? The house is gone now, the road remains, and somewhere between ash and possibility, the Sodder children wait, unclaimed by certainty, suspended in a mystery that refuses to rest. From the quiet hills of Appalachia, where children vanished into ash and unanswered questions, our journey now turns eastward into a remote expanse of Siberian wilderness where cold, forest, and mountain conspire to obscure what may have happened. Here, isolation is absolute, and the line between survival and the unknown is fragile. The Khamar-Daban Range stretches across southern Irkutsk Oblast, its jagged peaks and dense conifer forests carved by centuries of wind, snow, and time. In February 1993, 6 hikers set out into this region, drawn by the challenge of winter trekking and the promise of untouched snow. Experienced in the mountains, they were equipped for the cold. Yet, when they failed to return, their disappearance would spark a mystery echoing some of history's darkest patterns. Search efforts began immediately. Initially, authorities found little beyond the hikers' last campsite, a small clearing near a river, partially buried in snow. Their footprints vanished into the white wilderness. Later, scattered belongings emerged, a tent torn open from within, personal effects, and half-burned items indicating a hasty, fearful departure. Some evidence suggested they had tried to build a shelter in the forest, while others indicated they may have fled into the open, exposed to the brutal Siberian winter. When the bodies were eventually found, some weeks later, spread across several kilometers, the circumstances were disturbing. 4 of the hikers had succumbed to hypothermia, their bodies showing minimal trauma. Yet 2 presented injuries that defied simple explanation. One had a fractured skull, another severe internal damage inconsistent with a fall or accident. Clothing was partially removed, a perplexing detail reminiscent of other mysterious mountaineering deaths around the world, including the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident decades earlier. Official explanations leaned toward a combination of hypothermia, poor judgment, and environmental hazards. Siberian winters are merciless. Sudden storms, deep snow, and biting winds could easily overwhelm even the most prepared trekker. Panic, disorientation, and exhaustion might have led the hikers to separate, to abandon their tents, and to wander into fatal exposure. Yet gaps remain. Why were certain injuries so unusual, suggesting sudden and extreme force? Why were some tents and equipment left undisturbed while others appeared deliberately damaged or partially burned? Witness reports from locals, who had occasionally seen lights or heard distant shouting in the mountains around the time of the disappearance, further complicate the narrative. Could natural predators or hidden crevasses explain all of it? Or was there something more inexplicable at play? Speculative theories have persisted in hushed discussion. Some suggest secret military exercises in the area, remnants of Cold War-era tests, could have caused panic or injury. Others point to unusual meteorological phenomena, including sudden bursts of high wind or infrasound capable of disorienting humans, a theory explored after Dyatlov Pass and considered plausible in remote Siberian conditions. A small subset of theorists propose even stranger possibilities: unidentified aerial phenomena, or the presence of individuals or groups unknown to the hikers, whose motivations remain forever hidden. What remains striking is the pattern of ambiguity. Like the Sodder children or Hinterkaifeck, the Khamar-Daban hikers vanished into ordinary circumstances that somehow turned extraordinary. Hikers dressed for survival disappeared as if pulled by unseen forces. Their tracks, tents, and fires became riddles instead of evidence. Even when found, the bodies raised more questions than answers, their condition resisting easy categorization. The passage of time has only deepened the mystery. Snow and wind erased footprints. Forests reclaimed campsites. Local authorities archived reports, but few returned to review them. No photographs exist beyond the sparse documentation of the search effort, and the narratives of survivors or nearby residents remain inconsistent. Without new evidence, the incident exists primarily in memory, analysis, and speculation. What is haunting about the Khamar-Daban Incident is not only the physical disappearance, but the sense of something unseen dictating events. Was it an environmental anomaly, a sequence of human error amplified by nature? Or did some external, unknown force intervene, shaping the hikers' last hours in ways we can scarcely imagine? Perhaps the truth lies in fragments, footprints, partially burned equipment, a tent torn from within. But like so many of the darkest mysteries, the whole remains elusive. And so the mountains remain, silent and indifferent. Peaks that once challenged adventurers now hold the secrets of 6 lives, frozen in time. The wind passes through the trees, carrying only questions, and the forest keeps its counsel. What truly happened in those remote valleys on that winter night in 1993 may never be known. And yet, in the emptiness of the snow and the rustle of distant pines, the story waits, unsolved, haunting, and impossible to forget. From the snow-covered peaks of Siberia, where hikers vanished into forests and wind, our journey now moves northwest, across the North Atlantic, to a desolate archipelago where the sea claims as much as it reveals. Here, the land is small, jagged, and battered by waves so relentless that even the hardiest human presence seems almost temporary. It is in this remoteness that the next story unfolds, the disappearance of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers. The Flannan Isles, also known as the Seven Hunters, rise abruptly from the storm-tossed waters off the west coast of Scotland. The islands are sparsely vegetated, their cliffs steep and unforgiving, and their winds constant, carrying salt spray and the low hum of the ocean. In December 1900, 3 men maintained the lighthouse on Eilean Moor, the largest of the islands: Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur. Experienced, disciplined, and familiar with the dangers of isolation, they were responsible for ensuring that the lighthouse's light never faltered. When the supply ship Hesperus arrived on December 26th, it found the lighthouse shuttered, the lamp unmanned, and no sign of the men. Inside, the clocks had stopped, beds were unmade, food sat untouched, and chairs were overturned. Logs and records suggested that the men had gone about their duties as usual the previous day, yet no explanation existed for their sudden absence. Initial investigation noted the elements. The North Atlantic in winter is merciless, and a storm could sweep across the cliffs with terrifying speed. Large waves and sudden gusts might have dragged men from the rocks or swept them into the sea while performing routine tasks. A misstep in such terrain, combined with the power of nature, could have been fatal. Yet even this explanation encounters questions. No bodies were ever recovered. Equipment, tools, and personal effects were left behind, suggesting a departure that was abrupt, perhaps even planned, but the urgency remained unexplained. The logs from the lighthouse contained subtle hints of unusual conditions. On December 15th, weather reports mentioned a violent storm in the area, one stronger than typical seasonal expectations. One entry describes equipment being tossed by waves, though no indication of injury or panic is noted. If the storm played a role, how did it interact with the men's movements? Did it force them onto the cliffs, or did something else drive them outside? Speculation has grown over the years. Some suggest a freak wave, a phenomenon known to batter the Flannan cliffs, could have struck while the men investigated structural damage, sweeping them into the sea. Others have hypothesized more human-centered explanations. Could one keeper have panicked, causing a chain reaction among the others? Or did interpersonal conflict escalate into a scenario where all 3 left together, either deliberately or under duress? Less conventional theories linger on the edges of plausibility. Folklore and maritime superstition have long surrounded the islands. Sailors spoke of strange lights, phantom ships, and an eerie sense of being watched. Some suggest that the men might have been lured or distracted by inexplicable phenomena, whether psychological or environmental. A few researchers have noted the similarity between this disappearance and other inexplicable maritime vanishings, drawing parallels that remain suggestive but unprovable. The official conclusion accepted nature as the culprit, a combination of storm, cliffs, and isolation. Yet the anomalies endure. Why was there no struggle visible in the lighthouse? Why did the men leave personal effects behind? And perhaps most hauntingly, why did a fully equipped and maintained lighthouse suddenly become empty, leaving no footprints leading to a nearby cliff or evidence of the men's final movements? Over the decades, the mystery has inspired poets, writers, and investigators alike. The image of three disciplined men, vanishing without trace, continues to resonate because it disrupts our expectations of both nature and human behavior. Unlike the Sodder children or the Khamar-Daban hikers, the keepers were not in motion across continents or forests. They were stationary, in a place designed to preserve life and warn others, yet it could not protect them from disappearance. Today, the Flannan Isles remain largely uninhabited, save for brief scientific visits or maintenance crews. The lighthouse stands automated, a modern sentinel watching the same waves that once claimed Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur. Winds howl through the structure, echoing faintly in the imagination, and the sea continues its relentless rhythm, indifferent to the questions it leaves behind. What truly happened on Eilean Moor that December? Were the men victims of a single violent wave, or did the storm merely provide cover for a more subtle chain of events? Did superstition or misjudgment play a role, or were they caught in a sequence of circumstances so improbable it defies rational explanation? Perhaps, like the footprints in Siberian snow, or the ash of the Sodder house, the truth exists only in fragments, hinted at, recorded in logs and letters, but ultimately irretrievable. And so the islands stand, their cliffs jagged, their waves unyielding, and their keepers' fates suspended in mystery. In the endless cadence of wind and surf, the story whispers unanswered questions. What drew the men from the safety of their lighthouse into the cold void, and why has the sea refused to return them? From the storm-lashed cliffs of Scotland to the lonely peaks of Siberia and the icy isolation of lighthouses in the Atlantic, our journey now moves south into the dense forests and hills of Brazil, where a mystery unfolds not in snow or waves, but in heat, shadow, and stillness. It is here, in São Paulo state, that the story of the lead masks case begins, a case that remains as puzzling today as it did over half a century ago. On the evening of August 20th, 1966, two men were found dead on Vintem Hill near the city of Niterói, a short distance from the Atlantic coast. What initially appeared to be an ordinary case of sudden death quickly revealed details that were both baffling and disturbing. The men, later identified as Manuel Rodriguez da Silva and Miguel José Viana, were discovered lying face-up on a slope, fully dressed in formal suits. Their heads were covered with small, carefully shaped lead masks, and nearby lay a notebook with cryptic instructions. Be at the predetermined location. Wait for the signal. After instructions, ingest capsules. The scene offered no signs of struggle, no footprints suggesting a hurried flight, and no indication of external interference. Their bodies showed no trauma, no bruising, no wounds. Autopsies would later indicate death by unknown causes, possibly poisoning, though no chemical could be definitively identified. The precision of the scene suggested planning, yet no one knew why these two men had arranged themselves in this way, or what ritual or experiment they had been attempting. Investigators began piecing together their last movements. In the days before the deaths, Both men had reportedly been working on electronics and had expressed interest in spiritualism, mysticism, and alchemical practices. Witnesses claimed they had discussed experiments with signals from the heavens and chemical concoctions intended to aid in communication with unseen forces. Their obsession with esoteric knowledge, combined with meticulous preparation, added a layer of deliberate intention to what would otherwise appear as inexplicable deaths. Yet despite these details, key questions remained. Why lead masks? Why a formal dress code? And most perplexingly, why ingest unknown capsules in a secluded location rather than in the controlled environment of a laboratory or home? The juxtaposition of ceremonial precision with apparent fatal miscalculation created a puzzle that has since defied resolution. Mainstream theories initially leaned toward accidental poisoning, suggesting the men may have consumed chemicals intended to induce hallucinations or spiritual experiences, but miscalculated the dosage or combination. Others considered suicide, interpreting the masks and location as part of a private ritual. However, neither theory fully accounts for the combination of formal attire, lead masks, and the cryptic instructions in their notebook. Alternative theories have persisted in both scholarly and fringe circles. Some researchers propose that the men were engaged in secretive experiments with electromagnetic radiation, using the masks to shield themselves, though no equipment was found on site to support this. Others speculate about involvement with clandestine societies or occult groups, where the deaths may have been a culmination of ritualistic practice. A smaller, more speculative line of thought even considers extraterrestrial contact, a recurring theme in mid-20th century Brazilian mysticism, influenced by the wave of UFO reports in the region. Yet all of these theories remain unconfirmed. The lead masks themselves, small and molded to the face, suggest deliberate intent, possibly symbolic, possibly protective. The site's seclusion, atop a hill overlooking forests and urban sprawl, implies they chose isolation for a reason. But whether that reason was scientific, spiritual, or psychological remains uncertain. What continues to haunt investigators and curious observers alike is the silence of the victims themselves. Unlike accidents caused by nature or violence by others, the lead masks case appears self-contained. The men orchestrated their own demise, or disappearance into something beyond comprehension, with careful preparation, leaving only enigmatic artifacts and a haunting tableau behind. Their deaths were neither witnessed nor explained, and the world has been left only with fragments: the masks, the notebook, and the bodies frozen in time. In many ways, the case mirrors other dark mysteries we have explored: the Sodder children, the Hinterkaifeck farm, the Khamar-Daban hikers, where human intention intersects with forces beyond ordinary perception, and where the ordinary environment conceals extraordinary outcomes. The pattern is familiar: meticulous planning, abrupt disappearance or death, and a silence that refuses to yield clear answers. Today, the hill remains largely unchanged. Tourists pass by unaware. Locals may recall whispers of the deaths, but the masks, the notebook, and the men themselves exist only in archives, photographs, and retelling. The air of mystery is preserved by absence of witnesses, absence of physical evidence beyond the masks and paper, and absence of explanation. And so the question endures: what were Manuel Rodriguez da Silva and Miguel José Viana attempting to achieve on that isolated hill in 1966? Were they the architects of their own fate, seeking contact with forces unseen? Or did an unforeseen chemical or environmental factor end their lives before their plan could unfold? Perhaps, like so many of history's darkest mysteries, the truth has been absorbed into the shadows, leaving only the tableau of two men, lead masks in place, staring silently into the unknown. The hill remains, wind stirring the grass, the sun casting shifting shadows, and the world below continuing without knowledge of the strange, unresolved tableau perched atop the slope. The lead mask's case, like the mysteries before it, lingers quietly, inviting us to wonder. What lies at the intersection of human curiosity, risk, and the unknowable? From the hills and forests of Brazil, where two men disappeared beneath lead masks, our exploration now returns to England, to a woodland so ordinary in appearance that its secrets could be easily overlooked. Yet in the spring of 1943, this modest grove near Birmingham became the site of a discovery that would perplex investigators, haunt local residents, and ripple through folklore for decades: the case of Who Put Bella in the Wych Elm. The story begins with a simple, almost pastoral setting. Black country woodlands stretch across gently rolling hills, dominated by dense undergrowth, birch, oak, and the occasional wych elm. The air carries the scent of damp earth and moss, and the sunlight filters unevenly through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. On a warm April morning, a group of boys exploring these familiar woods stumbled upon a hollow wych elm. At first, it seemed an unremarkable tree, twisted, aged, and hollowed at its base. But the hollow contained something that would freeze their blood: a human skeleton, carefully concealed within the cavity, yet unmistakably deliberate in its placement. The remains belonged to an unidentified woman. Investigators estimated she had been dead for some months, perhaps longer, and was likely between 35 and 45 years old. The unusual position within the tree, combined with the absence of clothing or personal items, immediately suggested that this was no simple case of natural death or misadventure. The coroner described the placement as deliberate, implying a consciousness behind the concealment. Someone had taken the time and effort to hide her within the trunk, yet the location was not deeply secret, rather hidden in plain sight. The press seized on the story almost immediately. Local papers dubbed the woman Bella, a name borrowed from the anonymity of the body and the air of mystery surrounding her. Letters began to arrive at newspapers, police stations, and even government offices. Some contained cryptic rhymes and threats. Others claimed knowledge of Bella's fate or hinted at occult practices, espionage, or revenge. One letter read, "Who put Bella in the wych elm? Know her well, she went with men. Secrets dark and deep, will tell if you dare to keep." The volume and tone of correspondence suggested either a public obsession or the interference of someone seeking attention, or both. Mainstream investigators initially focused on wartime circumstances. England in 1943 was a nation under strain. German air raids, blackouts, and rationing created anxiety, fear, and secrecy. Some theories suggested that Bella had been a casualty of black market activity, or perhaps the unfortunate victim of local criminal elements exploiting wartime disorder. Others considered espionage, noting that rumors of resistance networks and coded messages were common, though no direct evidence connected the discovery to intelligence work. Yet certain details resisted explanation. No personal effects were ever recovered. The body was remarkably intact despite exposure, indicating that the concealment had been timely and deliberate. And the letters, though varied in content and authorship, persisted for years, with new correspondence adding obscure rhymes or taunting queries. Was the crime meant to be discovered, or had the perpetrator misjudged the isolation of the forest? As decades passed, more speculative and even folkloric interpretations took root. Some proposed witchcraft or ritualistic motives, connecting the case to ancient superstitions about wych elms as protective or sacred trees. Others suggested revenge, jealousy, or sexual violence, positing that Bella may have been silenced for knowledge she possessed or relationships she had. In this light, the tree becomes not merely a hiding place, but a silent witness to human cruelty and secrecy. One particularly persistent theory involves espionage or intrigue. Birmingham, during wartime, was a hub for industrial and military production. Rumors suggested that Bella may have been involved with agents or informants, and that her death was a warning or consequence of knowledge she held. While no concrete evidence has ever confirmed these suspicions, the context of war and the letter's cryptic nature lend them a plausibility that ordinary murder theories alone cannot fully explain. What is striking, even decades later, is the combination of careful concealment and deliberate exposure. The body was hidden in a hollow tree, a place not obvious to casual passers-by, yet accessible enough that discovery was inevitable. The letters suggest someone wanted the story to circulate, to unsettle, or perhaps to take pride in the concealment. This duality, secret yet public, deliberate yet enigmatic, remains central to the case's enduring fascination. Efforts to identify Bella have never succeeded. Modern forensic techniques, including DNA analysis, have been applied in the 21st century, but her identity remains elusive. The local folklore has absorbed her story, blending it with the broader anxieties of wartime Britain. Children explore the woods still, told to beware the hollow tree, while historians and true crime enthusiasts pore over archived letters, police reports, and press accounts, seeking patterns that may reveal the woman's life and the motives of her killer. The case endures because it exists at the intersection of the ordinary and the extraordinary. A common forest, a hollow tree, and a wartime community form the backdrop. Yet within this setting, an act was committed that defies simple understanding, a deliberate concealment, a body placed where discovery seemed inevitable, and messages that hint at knowledge withheld, perhaps still concealed. It is this tension between what we can see and what remains hidden that renders the story timeless. And so the wych elm stands, gnarled and silent, bearing witness to a secret over 70 years old. Leaves rustle in the wind, shadows shift across the forest floor, and the question remains unanswered. Who was Bella, and why did someone place her in that tree? Was it revenge, ritual, espionage, or a crime born of darker impulses? Perhaps, like the mysteries of the Dyatlov Pass or the Sodder children, the truth has been absorbed into the forest itself, leaving only fragments, speculation, and the enduring enigma of human intent. The tree endures, and with it, the question, who put Bella in the wych elm, and why does the forest still guard its secret? In the quiet of the woodland, where sunlight filters through ancient branches, the answer remains suspended between shadow and memory, inviting us to wonder what may still lie hidden in the places we think we know. From the shadowed forests of Worcestershire, where a young woman was hidden in a wych elm, our journey now moves across the Atlantic to the quiet streets of a small American town in Ohio, where secrets arrived not on the wind or hidden in the trees, but in envelopes, anonymous, deliberate, and unnervingly intimate. This is the story of the Circleville letter writer, a mystery that gripped a community for decades, blending ordinary life with a sustained, inexplicable terror. Circleville is a modest town, nestled along winding roads and scattered farmhouses, its main streets lined with small businesses and schools. In the late 1970s, it appeared unremarkable, a place where neighbors knew one another and the rhythms of life followed the seasons. Yet beneath the calm surface, a sinister presence emerged. Letters. Anonymous, typed, and meticulously delivered, they carried accusations, threats, and intimate knowledge that only a few residents could plausibly know. The first of these letters arrived in 1976. Mary Gillespie, a school bus driver and longtime resident, opened her mailbox to find a carefully worded note alleging an affair she had never had. The letter suggested that others in the town were aware of her supposed transgressions, and it warned her to cease her relationship with a local man. At first, Mary thought it a prank, a misguided joke from someone in the community. But the letters continued, arriving with unwavering regularity, each more threatening than the last. Soon, others became targets. The letters contained personal details that could not be easily dismissed, private schedules, descriptions of personal interactions, and knowledge of minor incidents within homes. Some residents reported feeling watched, noting figures in the shadows or cars lingering near their property. Anonymous tips escalated to legal threats, accusations of theft, and even violent warnings. The town was enveloped in a persistent low-grade fear, where every envelope was a potential harbinger of personal exposure or danger. In 1977, the case took a darker turn. Ronald Osborne, Mary Gillespie's husband, discovered one of the letters, and soon after, he was shot in the head while driving. Remarkably, he survived, but the incident confirmed the letters were not merely pranks. They were part of a campaign that could manifest real-world violence. Yet the identity of the author remained elusive. There were no fingerprints, no patterns in mailing times or locations that conclusively pointed to a perpetrator. Investigators pursued several leads. Some suspected local residents with grudges or knowledge of the town's inner workings. One theory focused on Paul Freshour, a man connected to Mary Gillespie's social circle, whose movements and associations drew scrutiny. Freshour would eventually be arrested and charged with the shootings and letter writing, but the case against him was complicated. While some letters were linked to him through postmarks and writing analysis, discrepancies persisted. Other letters continued even after his arrest, suggesting that the true Circleville letter writer might still have been active, or that multiple individuals had participated in the harassment. The letters themselves were remarkable in their tone and construction. Typed with an attention to detail, they conveyed both authority and menace. The writer demonstrated careful observation, often referencing seemingly trivial details with precision, but doing so in a way that amplified anxiety. The letters functioned as a psychological weapon, maintaining control over recipients through ambiguity and threat. Who could possess such knowledge, and why? Was this a personal vendetta, a sociopathic compulsion, or a manifestation of a broader, more clandestine scheme? Speculative theories flourished. Some suggested that the letters were motivated by jealousy or unrequited desire, while others proposed financial motives, revenge for perceived slights, or attempts to manipulate social relationships. A more conspiratorial perspective considers the possibility of multiple perpetrators coordinating anonymously, feeding off the town's fear to maintain power or influence. Yet another theory examines psychological manipulation, the use of letters as a medium to terrorize from a distance, exploiting the predictability of human anxiety and routine. Despite arrests, trials, and court proceedings, the Circleville letter writer remains a figure of ambiguity. Some residents believe the letters stopped only because Freshour was incarcerated. Others contend that the true author was never apprehended and that the terror persisted in subtler ways. The town itself bears the scars. Conversations still carry a wary edge, and the memory of envelopes in mailboxes continues to haunt older residents. What is perhaps most unsettling about the Circleville case is its intimacy. Unlike other mysteries that unfold in wildernesses, remote mountains, or isolated islands, these letters penetrated homes, schools, and personal lives. They converted mundane spaces, the mailbox, the driveway, the quiet street, into conduits for fear, and in doing so, they blurred the line between ordinary experience and ongoing psychological menace. The case illustrates a central paradox. The letters were both ordinary and extraordinary. Typing on paper, dropped into standard mailboxes, their physical presence was unremarkable. Yet the content transformed each envelope into a vessel of dread, exploiting trust, familiarity, and expectation. Every small action, opening a letter, reading its content aloud, discarding it, was charged with tension. The anonymity of the sender magnified this, leaving recipients to question what others might know and whether the threat was still active. As decades have passed, the Circleville letter writer has become a symbol of unresolved tension, the persistence of mystery in everyday life. Modern investigations, interviews, and historical records provide fragments, names, dates, letters, and court transcripts. Yet the essential question remains unanswered. Who orchestrated this campaign, and why? Even today, the streets of Circleville carry an echo of the past. Mailboxes stand at the roadside, letters arrive as always, yet the town is silent about the envelopes that once instilled fear. The case exists now largely in archives, photographs, and memory, a reminder that human obsession, vigilance, and malice can leave enduring traces even when the perpetrator vanishes. And so the question endures: who wrote the letters, and what drove them to persistently invade the lives of neighbors, friends, and strangers? Was it a calculated vendetta, a psychological compulsion, or something more opaque, inexplicable, and human? Like so many of history's darkest mysteries, the Circleville letter writer resists resolution, leaving only traces in paper, memory, and the quiet spaces between understanding and uncertainty. In the calm of the town today, with streets lined by quiet homes and children walking to school, the story lingers. The envelopes are gone, yet the anxiety, the meticulous observation, and the unanswered questions endure, suspended in the same space where everyday life meets the unknown. Who controls what we know, what we fear, and what remains hidden in plain sight? The Circleville letter writer may have departed, but the mystery continues to watch, silently, like the letters themselves once did. From the small town of Circleville, where letters became instruments of fear, our journey now moves across the Atlantic and back in time to Victorian England, where domestic spaces, supposedly safe and private, became the setting for a death that would confound investigators for decades. In the quiet streets of Pimlico, a household of seemingly ordinary affluence concealed secrets, tension, and ultimately, tragedy: the death of Charles Bravo. The story begins in a stately townhouse on the streets of Pimlico, characterized by its brick facade, iron railings, and the neatly kept windows that reflected the muted glow of gaslight in the evenings. Inside, the household was orderly, but charged with the quiet intensity of social expectation. Charles Bravo, a barrister by training, had married Florence Ricardo, a woman of charm and social ambition, several years prior. On the evening of April 21st, 1876, the ordinary rhythms of the house were disrupted by a tragedy so sudden, so inexplicable, that it would become one of England's most notorious unsolved deaths. Charles Bravo was found suffering from severe arsenic poisoning. Despite medical intervention, he lingered in agony for 14 days before succumbing. From the outset, the circumstances were mysterious. Bravo had no known enemies, and arsenic, while common in Victorian households as a component of medicines, dyes, and even household products, was lethal in high doses. How the poison entered his system and who was responsible became the central questions for investigators, journalists, and curious citizens alike. The household dynamics were complex. Florence, his wife, had a previous marriage and was rumored to have a domineering personality, while Charles was described as methodical, patient, and socially reserved. Servants were attentive, neighbors observant, and family connections intertwined. Yet beneath this veneer of propriety lay tension. Disagreements about finances, social appearances, and personal habits had created an environment of subtle hostility. In such a domestic setting, the question of motive became both intimate and perplexing. Early investigations focused on Florence Bravo. Letters, witness testimonies, and her proximity to her husband during his illness drew scrutiny. Some suggested she might have administered the poison intentionally, motivated by marital discord, financial concerns, or even jealousy. Florence maintained her innocence, and despite public suspicion, no definitive evidence ever linked her directly to the administration of arsenic. Other theories emerged almost immediately. Servants, though loyal, were questioned for potential access to household chemicals. Friends and acquaintances, aware of Bravo's temperament and social dealings, were considered for motives ranging from revenge to financial gain. Yet each investigation encountered the same frustration: a lack of conclusive evidence. The poison could have been delivered in small doses, slowly accumulating, leaving no traceable method or witness. Medical examinations confirmed that arsenic was the cause of death, but they could not determine the precise mode of administration. Theories ranged from contaminated medicine to tainted beverages, even to accidental exposure through household remedies. In Victorian England, arsenic was both ubiquitous and invisible in daily life, making accidental ingestion plausible. But the calculated symptoms and gradual progression of illness suggested intentionality. Speculative theories, both contemporary and modern, add layers of intrigue. Some historians propose that Florence Bravo may have unknowingly administered a medicinal preparation laced with arsenic, intended to treat a minor ailment. Others entertain a darker scenario, a deliberate act of murder, executed with meticulous planning to avoid detection. A few fringe interpretations consider the possibility of a third party, an acquaintance or relative with concealed motives, who leveraged the household's internal tensions to carry out the poisoning. Each hypothesis is tantalizing yet unprovable, leaving the truth suspended in ambiguity. Newspaper coverage at the time amplified the mystery. Sensationalist reporting, combined with public fascination with domestic scandal, created an atmosphere in which every glance, every whispered comment was scrutinized for hidden meaning. The household, once ordinary, became a stage for speculation, rumor, and fear. Observers debated character, motive, and opportunity, but none could reconcile the evidence with certainty. The death of Charles Bravo is particularly haunting because it occurred within the intimate confines of domestic life. Unlike murders in remote wildernesses, isolated islands, or shadowed forests, this tragedy unfolded where routine should have prevailed. The household itself, a symbol of safety, wealth, and control, was transformed into a site of suspense and fatal vulnerability. The familiar became unfamiliar, and every object, from medicine bottles to teacups, became potential instruments of death. Over the decades, the case has inspired books, analyses, and speculation. Modern forensic science can illuminate the chemical cause, but cannot reconstruct intent or motivation. Diaries, letters, and court records provide glimpses into daily life, revealing tensions, disagreements, and complex interpersonal dynamics. Yet, they cannot answer the central question: who, if anyone, deliberately ended Charles Bravo's life? In reflecting on this case, one is drawn to the broader question of human behavior within constrained spaces. How does domesticity, normally associated with safety, routine, and familiarity, intersect with secrecy, ambition, and resentment? Could the poison have been a product of deliberate calculation, reckless experimentation, or accident? And if deliberate, what does the act reveal about human capacity for concealment, subtlety, and the manipulation of trust? The townhouse in Pimlico still stands, its brickwork weathered, its windows reflecting light but holding memories. Inside, the echoes of the past remain intangible, hidden within walls that bore witness to a life ended under mysterious circumstances. Streets outside hum with modern life, oblivious to the shadows that once fell across their threshold. Yet in archives, photographs, and historical retellings, the case endures, a reminder of a death that was neither abrupt nor easily explained, and of human intentions that may forever remain beyond reach. And so the mystery persists. Who administered the arsenic, and why did Charles Bravo endure such suffering before his death? Was it an act of personal vengeance, domestic tension taken to lethal extremes, or a tragic accident compounded by circumstance? Like the unsolved stories before it, the Circleville letters, the Bellowitch elm, and the lead masks, this case resists closure, leaving only the careful reconstruction of evidence, the haunting of unanswered questions, and the enduring enigma of human intent within spaces we assume are safe. The townhouse remains quiet now, but within its walls, history whispers. The answers lie somewhere between observation and assumption, between the known and the unknowable, waiting perhaps forever for discovery. From the quiet streets of Pimlico, where domestic life concealed tragedy, our journey now turns north, to the dark waters and dense forests of Finland, where summer camps and carefree evenings gave way to one of the country's most infamous unsolved crimes, the Lake Bodom murders. Here, nature's beauty is mirrored by its capacity for menace, as still waters and shadowed trees form a backdrop for mystery that has persisted for more than 6 decades. Lake Bodom lies in Espoo, surrounded by pine forests that shimmer green in daylight and become a tangle of shadows after sunset. In the summer of 1960, 4 teenagers set out to camp on the northern shore, a tradition for many Finnish youth, sleeping in tents, cooking over fires, and enjoying the long daylight hours. The air carried the scent of pine and lake water mixed with the warmth of mid-June sun, a sense of freedom and youthful optimism. Yet within this idyllic setting, a violent and inexplicable act would soon unfold, shattering lives and leaving questions that continue to haunt Finland's collective memory. In the early hours of June 5th, the campers were attacked while they slept. When a morning visitor discovered the site, 3 of the teenagers, aged 16 and 17, were dead, their bodies showing severe head injuries. The 4th, Niels Gustafsson, survived with minor wounds, but was unable to clearly recall the events of that night. The scene was both chilling and perplexing, a tent pierced, sleeping bags disturbed, and no clear sign of motive or weapon placement. The brutality was indiscriminate yet precise, leaving investigators to grapple with a sequence of actions that seemed almost ritualistic in its randomness. Investigators initially focused on the immediate environment. The remote location suggested a transient perpetrator, someone passing through or familiar with the woods. Forensic methods of the 1960s were limited, but early analyses suggested a sharp instrument, likely a knife or blunt object, was used, with injuries concentrated on the heads of the victims. The survivor's account provided fragments of a narrative, but his recollection was inconsistent, creating a further layer of ambiguity. Witness statements, tracks in the mud, and impressions of tents offered few clues, as the natural landscape absorbed evidence quickly. Rain, wind, and wildlife erased or altered what had occurred. Mainstream theories initially considered personal motives. Were the teenagers targeted because of a dispute, jealousy, or rivalry? Some suspected local youth, transient campers, or even an adult seeking revenge. However, investigations failed to identify anyone with a plausible connection to the victims or a credible reason for the attack. Niels Gustafsson himself was questioned extensively over the years, but his minor injuries, age, and ambiguous recollections left investigators with more questions than answers. Speculative theories soon emerged, blending circumstance with imagination. Some considered the possibility of a sexually motivated attack, while others suggested a random act of violence by an unknown stranger. In the decades that followed, conspiracy theories gained traction. Could an organized individual, or even a group, have targeted the campers for reasons that would never be known. A small subset of researchers have proposed more esoteric explanations, including ritualistic killings or psychological experimentation, though these remain speculative and unsupported by concrete evidence. What adds to the haunting quality of the Lake Bodom case is the interplay between innocence and brutality. The teenagers were engaged in ordinary summer activities, campfires, swimming, conversation, when violence intruded. The juxtaposition of natural serenity with sudden horror transforms the landscape itself into a silent witness, a place where ordinary life and extraordinary violence intersect. The lake, with its placid surface reflecting sunlight and clouds, hides beneath it the echoes of screams and unanswered questions. Over the decades, the case has remained partially unresolved. Gustafsson, the surviving camper, was repeatedly scrutinized, particularly in the 2000s when forensic re-examinations suggested that he could have been responsible. Yet even modern investigative methods have failed to definitively assign culpability. The combination of the passage of time, limited evidence, and the isolation of the crime scene has rendered Lake Bodom a puzzle resistant to resolution. The murders also left a profound cultural imprint. Books, documentaries, and popular discussion have kept the mystery alive, each retelling highlighting different elements: the randomness of violence, the vulnerability of youth, and the inscrutable nature of human behavior. Songs and local folklore immortalize the tragedy, reinforcing a sense that Lake Bodom is more than a location. It is a symbol of unresolved fear and the unknown lurking in otherwise familiar places. Perhaps the most disturbing element is the simplicity of the setting. No secret passage, hidden weapon, or elaborate plot existed. Just a campsite, a tent, and the natural elements. Yet from this ordinary scene arose a sequence of actions that left multiple lives extinguished, questions unanswered, and an entire community shaken. How could such a quiet, isolated setting become the site of deliberate violence? Was it the work of someone the teenagers knew, or a stranger exploiting the cover of nature? Could human malice alone explain the precise and terrifying outcome? Or did circumstance, fear, and randomness converge in a way no one could have predicted? Lake Bodom, with its still waters and shadowed forest, continues to hold its secrets. Modern visitors can paddle across the surface or walk along its shores, unaware of the tragedy beneath the pine canopy. The campsite has changed over time, yet traces of the past remain in photographs, police records, and the memories of those connected to the victims. Every ripple on the lake and rustle in the trees is a reminder of a night that defies understanding. And so the mystery persists, not just in evidence or theory, but in the tension between what is seen and what is hidden. Were the murders an act of calculated cruelty, a spontaneous eruption of violence, or a tragic accident misinterpreted in retrospect? Does the surviving camper hold answers, or is memory itself insufficient to reveal the truth? Like so many of the darkest mysteries before it, the Circleville letters, Bella in the Wych Elm, and the lead masks, the Lake Bodom murders resist closure, leaving only fragments, speculation, and the quiet echo of a night forever etched into the landscape. The forest, the lake, and the distant hills remain indifferent to human investigation. They hold shadows where the mind searches for answers, hiding the events of that fateful night in the folds of trees and waves. In the interplay of water, wind, and memory, the Lake Bodom murders endure, a reminder that even in places of apparent peace, darkness can intrude, leaving questions that may never be answered. From the dark waters of Lake Bodom, where summer leisure became tragedy, our journey now shifts southward to the heart of the American Midwest, where the ordinary rhythms of suburban life were disrupted one night in 1992. In Springfield, Missouri, the disappearance of 3 women, known collectively as the Springfield Three, transformed a familiar home, quiet streets, and a small community into a tableau of enduring mystery and fear. The home itself, located on a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburb of Springfield, was unremarkable. A single-story ranch-style house with neatly trimmed lawns, flower beds, and windows that reflected the fading light of a warm July evening. Inside, however, the ordinary nature of domestic life was betrayed by the abrupt absence of those who lived there. On the night of June 7, 1992, two women, Cheryl Levitt, age 47, and her daughter Susie Streeter, age 19, along with Susie's friend Stacy McCall, age 18, vanished without a trace. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle in the living room or bedrooms, and no clear evidence pointing to an intruder. The door was locked, windows closed, yet the three were gone. Investigators arrived quickly, responding to concerned relatives who noticed the women had not returned from an evening of routine activities. Inside the home, the scene offered no answers. Personal belongings were untouched, the kitchen orderly, and daily routines appeared uninterrupted. In the absence of evidence, detectives faced a puzzle. How could three women disappear from a secure home in the span of a few hours? The question itself seemed almost impossible, yet the reality of their absence demanded explanation. Initial theories focused on known acquaintances and potential abductions. Law enforcement explored domestic disputes, romantic entanglements, and connections within the social circle of the missing women. Yet interviews yielded no concrete leads, and the usual avenues of motive, financial gain, revenge, or familial conflict failed to provide clarity. The home itself revealed little. There were no signs of theft, no evidence of a struggle, and no items removed in a manner consistent with a hurried departure. The disappearance had been surgical in its execution, leaving behind a sense of deliberate planning or unusual circumstance. Over time, alternative possibilities emerged. Some theorists suggested that the women may have left voluntarily, perhaps under duress or coercion, though the lack of communication or financial transactions undermined this explanation. Others considered the possibility of a stranger abduction, someone who knew the patterns of the household and exploited them with precise timing. The notion of a calculated, patient perpetrator was supported by the absence of any forced entry or immediate clues, yet no suspect was identified in the critical hours following the disappearance. The case drew national attention, in part because of its inexplicability. Media coverage emphasized the unsettling normality of the neighborhood and the incongruity of the event. Suburban order disrupted by an act that seemed both impossible and deliberate. Letters, tips, and potential sightings flooded law enforcement, each a thread of hope and frustration, yet none yielded verifiable outcomes. Psychologists, criminologists, and investigative journalists debated motives, methods, and possibilities, but the case resisted conventional explanation. Speculative theories proliferated. Some suggested involvement by organized criminals or transient individuals targeting the home at a precise time. Others proposed cult or ritualistic activity, noting patterns in other disappearances of young women during the same period across the United States. A smaller, more unconventional line of thought considered paranormal or unexplained forces, inspired by the clean, almost sterile nature of the disappearance. While these ideas range from the plausible to the fringe, they reflect a broader challenge. The Springfield Three vanished in a manner that defies standard investigative expectations. What makes this case particularly haunting is the domestic setting. Unlike disappearances in wildernesses or remote areas, this occurred in a space presumed safe, familiar, well-kept, and closely observed. The women's absence transformed the home from sanctuary to stage of uncertainty, where every ordinary object, locked doors, tidy rooms, unmade beds, acquired significance as silent witnesses to a crime without a scene. The very ordinariness of the setting magnifies the mystery. How could three adults, engaged in typical evening routines, vanish from such a controlled environment? Over the years, law enforcement revisited the case multiple times, applying forensic advancements, cold case techniques, and renewed interviews. Investigators considered neighbors, acquaintances, and even distant leads, yet the trail remained cold. Each lead seemed to produce more questions than answers, reinforcing the sense that the case exists in a space between known fact and unresolved possibility. The cultural impact of the Springfield 3 disappearance is notable. Books, documentaries, and podcasts have explored every facet, from psychological profiles of potential suspects to the minutiae of the household layout. The case resonates because it intersects with fear, familiarity, and the inexplicable. It forces us to confront the idea that ordinary life can be disrupted in ways that leave no immediate evidence, no clear perpetrator, and no closure. In reflecting on the case, one observes recurring themes found in other dark mysteries we have explored: the tension between human expectation and unpredictable reality, the intrusion of violence into spaces we assume are safe, and the limits of perception in reconstructing events. How could 3 women vanish from a secure home? Was it a meticulously planned abduction, an opportunistic crime executed with precision, or something beyond conventional understanding? And perhaps most haunting, what remains hidden in the quiet, unremarkable spaces of suburban life, waiting to challenge assumptions about safety and routine? The home, the cul-de-sac, and the streets of Springfield continue their daily rhythms. Children play in yards, neighbors walk dogs, and life moves forward. Yet for those who study, remember, or connect with the case, the story of the Springfield 3 remains suspended in time. Doors lock, windows close, and lives are presumed secure. But the memory of that night in 1992 serves as a reminder that even familiar surroundings can conceal the extraordinary. And so the question endures: what truly happened to Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall? Were they taken by a known acquaintance, a stranger, or a force never fully understood? Will evidence someday emerge, or will the case remain a shadowed chapter of human history, reminding us of the fragile boundary between normalcy and the unknown? Like the Lake Bodom murders, the lead masks, and the Bella Witch Elm, the Springfield 3 disappearance lingers in the space between observation and imagination, a mystery that continues to haunt and invite reflection, its answers hidden just beyond the reach of certainty. From the quiet suburbs of Springfield, Missouri, where 3 women vanished without a trace, our exploration now moves to the sun-drenched beaches of Glenelg, where innocence and play were interrupted by one of Australia's most haunting and enduring mysteries: the disappearance of the Beaumont children. Here, the ordinary joys of a summer outing transformed into a puzzle that has confounded investigators, fascinated the public, and left questions unanswered for more than 6 decades. It was a warm, bright morning on January 26, 1966, when Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont, aged 9, 7, and 4 respectively, ventured out to Glenelg Beach, a place where families strolled along the shore, children played in the sand, and the lapping waves offered the gentle rhythm of summer. The beach, with its golden sands, promenade, and salt-laden breeze, seemed perfectly ordinary. Tourists and locals mingled along the coastline, unaware that within hours the laughter of children would be replaced by a silence that still echoes across Australia. The children had walked to the beach together, leaving their home a short distance away, planning a few hours of fun before returning for lunch. But when afternoon came, the Beaumont children did not return. Initial searches by family and neighbors produced no clues. The sand bore no definitive footprints leading away from the beach. No items belonging to the children were discovered, and witnesses reported only fleeting glimpses of figures near the shoreline, none definitively connected to the children. In a community where life moved predictably, the sudden absence of 3 young lives sent shockwaves of fear and disbelief. Police investigations began almost immediately. Officers canvassed the area, interviewed locals, and examined every possible lead, from strangers seen near the beach to abandoned vehicles in nearby streets. Flyers and photographs were distributed across South Australia, appealing for information. Yet the initial days of the search revealed the first of many frustrating realities. The Beaumont children had vanished as if swallowed by the summer air itself, leaving no physical trace beyond their empty home and the anxious memories of their parents. Mainstream theories quickly emerged. Some investigators suggested that the children had been lured by a stranger, perhaps someone familiar with the rhythms of the area and the routines of local families. Others considered the possibility of abduction for ransom, though no demands were ever made. Despite exhaustive interviews and witness accounts, no suspect was immediately identified. As the investigation deepened, the absence of physical evidence, no bodies, no belongings, no definitive leads, became the defining challenge of the case. Over the years, speculation has expanded. Some researchers focused on transient workers, itinerant strangers, or local individuals with access to the beach and knowledge of the children's habits. Others proposed darker possibilities: opportunistic predation, ritualistic motives, or even involvement in broader criminal networks operating in the region during the 1960s. Each theory is tantalizing, supported by circumstantial connections, behavioral analysis, or patterns of reported sightings. But none have produced conclusive answers. The case has also attracted the attention of modern forensic experts. Advances in DNA technology, witness profiling, and criminal behavior analysis have been applied retrospectively, examining archived materials, letters, and suspect reports. Yet even with these tools, the fundamental mystery remains intact. The absence of physical remains, combined with conflicting reports from witnesses and the passage of decades, creates a landscape where certainty is impossible and speculation becomes both compelling and necessary. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Beaumont case is the innocence of the victims. Children walking freely along a familiar beach, a place associated with joy and familial routine, became the focus of human malevolence, or misfortune, in a manner that defies ordinary understanding. Unlike mysteries in isolated wildernesses or remote structures, this event occurred in a public space, surrounded by witnesses who saw nothing definitive. How could 3 children disappear so completely, so silently, in plain view of ordinary life? Cultural memory has preserved the event with remarkable clarity. Photographs of Jane, Arna, and Grant, smiling, playful, unaware of the darkness ahead, appear in books, documentaries, and media retrospectives. The case has inspired films, investigative journalism, and even folklore, highlighting the tension between the ordinariness of the setting and the extraordinariness of the crime. Discussions of motive, timing, and opportunity continue to this day, reflecting a deep societal fascination with the vulnerability of youth and the incomprehensibility of human malice. Speculative theories have grown increasingly elaborate over the decades. Some suggest that the children were taken by someone with prior knowledge of the family's routines. Others focus on broader networks of predation, raising questions about organized criminal activity or even ritualistic practices that may have been present in 1960s Adelaide. Certain fringe theories explore the possibility of transportation out of the state, an idea fueled by intermittent reports of children resembling the Beaumonts in distant towns or countries. Each hypothesis is tantalizing, yet none have been substantiated, leaving the narrative suspended between documented fact and imaginative reconstruction. In examining the Beaumont Children case, one notices recurring motifs found in other dark mysteries: the intersection of ordinary life and extraordinary crime, the role of observation, or the absence of it, and the psychological impact of unresolved disappearance on communities and families. How does a family recover from such ambiguity? How does a society process a crime without closure, without evidence, without answers? The beach, once a scene of playful sun and surf, is now forever linked to the unknown. Even today, Glenelg Beach remains vibrant with life. Tourists stroll along the promenade, children play in the sand, and seagulls wheel overhead. Yet for those who remember the events of January 26, 1966, the waves carry more than gentle rhythm. They carry echoes of loss and unanswered questions. Every ripple against the shore, every shadow cast by the afternoon sun seems to remind us of the fragility of human life and the ease with which it can vanish under circumstances we may never fully understand. And so the question endures. What became of Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont? Were they abducted by someone known or unknown, acting on impulse or careful planning? Did circumstance, timing, and human cruelty converge to create a perfect storm of disappearance? Or are the answers concealed somewhere beyond the reach of memory, hidden within the currents of the beach, the tides of time, and the gaps in observation? Like the Springfield Three, the Lake Bodom victims, and the lead masks, the Beaumont children remain symbols of the mysteries that continue to haunt human consciousness, suspended between hope, fear, and the unrelenting unknowable. In the warmth of the summer sun, the sand shifting beneath footsteps, and the endless horizon of the ocean, the Beaumont children's story persists, unresolved, compelling, and a reminder that even the brightest, most ordinary days can conceal shadows that endure for generations. From the sun-drenched beaches of Glenelg, where the Beaumont children vanished without a trace, our journey now moves northward across the Pacific to the heartland of America, to a quiet Midwestern town where the night of June 10, 1912, would become synonymous with horror, mystery, and the enduring question of human cruelty: the Villisca Axe Murders. In this small Iowa community, the ordinary rhythms of domestic life were shattered by violence so sudden and so intimate that the echoes of that night continue to haunt the town and the broader American consciousness more than a century later. Villisca, a modest town in Iowa, was typical of early 20th century rural America. Tree-lined streets, tidy homes, and a strong sense of neighborly familiarity. Families knew each other by name, children played freely along sidewalks, and evenings were often quiet, punctuated only by the distant whistle of a train or the laughter of neighbors gathered for social calls. One such home, the Moore family residence at 508 East 2nd Street, was, on the night in question, the setting for a horror that would defy understanding. Inside the Moore household, Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 young visiting girls were settling in for the night. Gas lamps cast a soft glow across polished floors, walls adorned with family photographs and neatly arranged furniture. By all appearances, the evening followed the ordinary patterns of domestic life. Yet somewhere in the quiet, beneath the soft ticking of a clock, a presence moved, an intruder whose motives, timing, and identity remain unresolved to this day. When neighbors discovered the scene the following morning, it was immediately apparent that something extraordinary and horrific had occurred. Every member of the Moore household, along with the visiting girls, had been bludgeoned to death with an axe. The bedrooms bore the marks of violent struggle, the floors slick with blood, and the air heavy with the lingering scent of violence. The crime was intimate in its execution. The killer had entered the home, moved silently through private spaces, and attacked each individual at close range, suggesting both meticulous planning and an extraordinary level of cruelty. Initial investigations focused on those known to the family and community. Josiah Moore was a local businessman, respected and well-connected, with no known enemies. Rumors circulated regarding neighbors, itinerant workers, and traveling salesmen, yet each lead failed to produce conclusive evidence. The sheer brutality of the murders, combined with the absence of forced entry or overt motive, left authorities grappling with a sequence of events that seemed both deliberate and inexplicably cruel. As with many unsolved mysteries, mainstream theories coexisted with speculation. Some proposed a personal vendetta against the Moore family, perhaps motivated by business disputes or social grievances. Others suggested a random act of violence by a transient individual, exploiting the quiet isolation of rural life to commit murder and disappear undetected. Yet no one could reconcile the timing, the apparent knowledge of the home's layout, or the methodical manner of the attacks with a single, identifiable suspect. Over the decades, alternative theories have emerged. Some investigators considered the possibility of a religious or cult-related motive, noting the ritualistic aspects of the killings, the use of the household axe, the targeting of both adults and children, and the apparent knowledge of the home's interior. Others have suggested the involvement of serial offenders, either local or itinerant, operating in a pattern that remains obscured by incomplete records. Fringe speculation even entertains the idea of psychological obsession, a killer compelled by fascination, rage, or compulsion to strike in a particularly personal way. Each theory offers insight but no definitive resolution, leaving the event suspended between known fact and unanswerable question. What makes the Villisca murders particularly haunting is their domestic intimacy. Unlike crimes committed in wildernesses, remote camps, or transient locations, this violence unfolded within a familiar, secure environment. Bedrooms, hallways, and living spaces, places associated with family safety, became the stage for extreme violence. The juxtaposition of the familiar and the horrific amplifies the psychological impact, highlighting the vulnerability inherent in spaces we presume secure. How could a household, so ordinary and open, fall prey to such deliberate and targeted cruelty? Investigators of the time employed the methods available: witness interviews, canvassing the town, and forensic examination of the scene. Yet even with diligence, the case defied closure. Suspects were questioned, from a local minister to a traveling handyman, and several were even brought to trial. Each trial ended without definitive conviction, often due to insufficient evidence, unreliable witness accounts, or procedural limitations. In the absence of modern forensic tools such as DNA profiling, the trail gradually grew colder, leaving the Villisca Axe Murders suspended in history as a chilling example of unsolved violence. The case has left a profound cultural imprint. The house itself became a site of fascination and fear, preserved for decades as both a historical landmark and a locus of legend. Researchers, historians, and paranormal investigators have examined the home, interpreting shadows, residual impressions, and anecdotal reports through lenses ranging from criminal analysis to supernatural inquiry. The enduring attention speaks to the power of human curiosity when confronted with events that blend horror, intimacy, and inscrutability. Speculative theories, some credible and others more fringe, continue to circulate. Could the murders have been motivated by jealousy, greed, or revenge? Did the killer harbor a pathological compulsion, choosing the Moore family as the object of ritualized violence? Or was this the act of an opportunistic stranger, exploiting the rural landscape and the town's trust in human predictability? Modern analyses attempt to reconstruct timelines, behavioral patterns, and psychological profiles, but even with these insights, the fundamental questions remain unanswered. In reflecting on Villisca, one observes recurring motifs familiar from other dark mysteries: the intrusion of violence into spaces of perceived safety, the role of timing and opportunity in crimes that leave minimal evidence, and the enduring fascination that arises when human behavior defies expectation. How does a community absorb the shock of such brutality? How do families reconcile ordinary life with the inexplicable? And perhaps most haunting, what do these events reveal about the capacity for cruelty hidden beneath ordinary social facades? Today, the Villisca house stands as both a historic site and a reminder of unanswered questions. Streets in the surrounding town have modernized. Neighbors walk, children play, and life continues. Yet within the house, shadows of the past linger. Every creaking floorboard, every quiet room, is a silent witness to a night when ordinary life was shattered, leaving behind only evidence, memory, and speculation. And so the question endures: who killed the Moors and the visiting children, and why? Was it an act of deliberate vengeance, opportunistic violence, or something more psychologically obscure? Can the truth ever be reconstructed from the fragments of testimony, forensic evidence, and the passage of time? Like the Beaumont Children, the Springfield 3, and the Lake Bodom victims, the Villisca Axe Murders remain suspended in the space between human understanding and the unknown, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can intrude upon ordinary life. In the quiet of a Midwestern night, the axe rests, the house endures, and the question remains: what truly happened on that June evening in 1912? The answer, elusive and persistent, continues to invite reflection, speculation, and the uneasy realization that some mysteries are destined to remain unresolved. From the quiet streets of Villisca, where families were struck down in their homes, our journey now drifts northward into the frozen expanse of Canada, to a remote and desolate landscape where nature dominates and human presence is fragile. Here lies Anjikuni Lake, a site whose silence has intrigued, unsettled, and confounded those who have investigated its most chilling mystery: the sudden disappearance of an entire Inuit village, leaving homes, belongings, and even meals untouched. A scene so peculiar that it has inspired speculation for decades. Anjikuni Lake sits deep within northern Manitoba, a vast body of water framed by snow-laden forests and frozen tundra in winter, and by lakeside marshes and dense evergreens during the brief summer months. The village itself was small, home to perhaps several dozen residents, whose lives were intimately connected to the rhythms of the land and lake. Hunting, fishing, and seasonal migrations dictated daily life, with survival requiring careful knowledge of weather, wildlife, and geography. In such isolation, every individual, every family, contributed to the delicate balance that made the settlement sustainable. In November of 1930, an anomaly occurred. Joe LaBelle, a fur trapper traveling through the region, arrived at the village to check on local Inuit families who traded furs and provisions. What he discovered stunned him. Not a single person remained. Homes were intact, fires were left burning, food remained in pots on stoves, and personal belongings, clothing, tools, even sled dogs, were abandoned without explanation. The village appeared frozen in time, as though the inhabitants had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only echoes of ordinary life. The initial reaction of authorities and locals was a mixture of disbelief and alarm. How could an entire community disappear without a trace? Early reports suggested that up to 60 residents might have vanished, though exact numbers remain uncertain due to inconsistent record-keeping and the transient nature of the population. Investigators noted the absence of struggle, theft, or damage, reinforcing the sense that this was not a sudden attack or violent confrontation. The land itself appeared untouched, further deepening the mystery. No footprints led away, no signs of forced movement through the snow, no evidence of forced migration. Mainstream explanations attempted to reconcile the facts with known human and environmental factors. Could the villagers have relocated voluntarily, perhaps drawn by better resources or following migratory patterns of game? Some historians argue that the harsh northern winters, unpredictable conditions, and limited provisions could have prompted a rapid departure. Others suggest disease as a potential factor, though no bodies or burial sites were ever discovered to confirm illness as a cause. Even when environmental or practical considerations are applied, the sudden and complete disappearance remains difficult to explain. Over time, more speculative and enigmatic theories gained traction. Paranormal enthusiasts posited extraterrestrial involvement, citing the village's sudden evacuation without trace as evidence of abduction. Some researchers suggested the possibility of secretive government or industrial interference, though no documented activity in the area aligns with such claims. A smaller subset of theorists considers spiritual or mystical explanations rooted in indigenous folklore, that the village was swept away by unseen forces as a consequence of taboos, ancestral warnings, or otherworldly intervention. While these ideas are largely anecdotal and unverifiable, they illustrate the compelling, almost mythic quality of the disappearance. Physical evidence, or rather the lack thereof, remains central to the enigma. Joe LaBelle and subsequent investigators reported meals left uneaten, animals unfed, and tools perfectly arranged, implying that the villagers had departed abruptly yet deliberately, taking nothing of consequence but leaving their lives entirely behind. How could dozens of people vanish without leaving footprints, signs of distress, or any communication indicating intent? Could environmental conditions, deep snow, frozen lakes, or sudden weather events, have erased evidence? Or does the absence of traces suggest something beyond ordinary explanation? The case of Anjikuni Lake also highlights the interplay between isolation and human vulnerability. In urban or even rural communities, disappearances of a few individuals, though tragic, leave traces. Neighbors notice absences, authorities respond quickly, and social networks provide a framework for investigation. In a remote northern village, the disappearance of many individuals simultaneously stretches investigative capabilities to their limit. The harsh environment, limited communication, and vast terrain transform the mystery into a narrative of both human and geographical intrigue. Over decades, retellings of the Anjikuni disappearance have blended documented reports, personal accounts, and folklore. Some scholars question the reliability of newspaper accounts from the early 1930s, suggesting embellishment or misinterpretation of smaller-scale movements. Yet, even if the scale is uncertain, the consistent element remains the sudden, unexplained absence of villagers, an event that defies ordinary patterns of migration, conflict, or survival. What makes this case particularly haunting is the intimate glimpse into ordinary life that it preserves. Homes remained furnished, stoves held half-prepared meals, and possessions lay in place as though the villagers expected to return. The abruptness of departure transforms the mundane into the uncanny. Ordinary spaces become haunted by questions. Did some unseen threat drive the villagers away? Were they compelled to leave by circumstance, fear, or unknown forces? Or is the story of Anjikuni Lake a fusion of memory, oral tradition, and imagination, preserving the mystery through narrative rather than empirical evidence? Reflecting on Anjikuni Lake, one cannot escape the tension between known facts and unanswerable questions. How do we interpret disappearance in spaces dominated by nature? How do isolation, environmental extremes, and human behavior intersect to produce events that elude conventional understanding? Is it possible that a community could vanish without leaving physical or communicative traces? Or does this story illustrate the limits of record, observation, and human imagination in extreme settings? Today, Anjikuni Lake remains remote, its waters dark and still, its forests dense and silent. Occasional trappers, researchers, and travelers pass through, noting the beauty and harshness of the landscape, often unaware of the village that once existed along its shores. The environment itself endures. Lakes freeze, snow drifts form and melt, and the natural rhythms continue, indifferent to human narrative. Yet in historical accounts, folklore, and the imagination of those drawn to mystery, the vanished village lives on. And so the question endures: What truly happened at Anjikuni Lake? Did the villagers depart voluntarily, succumb to natural causes, or encounter forces beyond ordinary comprehension? Was it human action, environmental circumstance, or something inexplicable that led to their disappearance? Like the Beaumont Children, the Springfield Three, and the Villisca Axe victims, the silent village remains a space where ordinary life meets extraordinary absence, inviting reflection, speculation, and the enduring recognition that some mysteries may never fully reveal their secrets. In the stillness of the northern wilderness, the houses no longer stand, the inhabitants are absent, and only the frozen lake bears witness. Yet the story persists, an echo across time, challenging our understanding of human life, disappearance, and the subtle boundaries between the known and the unknowable. From the remote silence of Anjikuni Lake, where an entire village seemed to vanish into the northern wilderness, our journey now drifts southwest toward the rugged coastlines and towering evergreens of Vancouver, British Columbia. Here lies Stanley Park, a space celebrated for its natural beauty, its winding trails, and the daily rhythm of city life intermingling with forested solitude. Yet in the spring of 1953, this urban sanctuary became the setting for one of Canada's most haunting unsolved crimes, the murder of two young children, known to history as the Babes in the Wood. Stanley Park, even in the early 1950s, was a mosaic of contrasts. On one hand, it was a public space. Families strolled along the seawall. Cyclists traced the curves of forested pathways, and children played among the carefully maintained gardens. On the other hand, the park's dense interior offered shadows, hidden alcoves, and quiet groves that could conceal movement, footsteps, and secrets. It was into this duality, familiar and secretive, that tragedy intruded, disrupting ordinary life and exposing the fragility of human safety even in the most seemingly secure environments. On May 27, 1953, the bodies of two children, 7-year-old Joan Lawson and 8-year-old June Callahan, were discovered in a wooded section of Stanley Park. The scene was both ordinary and horrifying. The children had been placed beneath a thick canopy of trees, partially hidden by ferns and underbrush, and yet certain details betrayed the deliberate nature of the crime. They had not simply been victims of accident or misadventure. Evidence suggested restraint, foul play, and an intentional effort to conceal the young lives from discovery, yet without erasing all traces of human presence. The immediate response of law enforcement and local residents was one of shock and disbelief. Stanley Park was a space frequented by families, and yet within this familiar setting, violence had struck in a manner both intimate and precise. Investigators combed the wooded areas, noting footprints, discarded items, and traces of disturbed earth, but none pointed definitively to a suspect. The children's school bags, clothing, and personal effects were scattered but intact, suggesting a perpetrator familiar enough with the environment to stage the scene without leaving obvious clues. Initial theories emphasized the possibility of someone known to the children. Were they lured from safety by a family acquaintance, a neighbor, or a trusted adult? Interviews with teachers, family members, and acquaintances produced conflicting information, and yet no clear motive emerged. Unlike cases driven by ransom, theft, or revenge, the Babes in the Wood case offered no immediate explanation, leaving investigators to grapple with the stark question of how two children could vanish into an urban park unnoticed and be found only after tragedy had occurred. As the investigation deepened, mainstream explanations proved insufficient. The lack of eyewitness accounts, combined with the careful concealment of the bodies, suggested a level of planning inconsistent with impulsive violence. Could the perpetrator have known the children's routines, the park's interior paths, and the locations less traveled by the public? Theories ranged from opportunistic strangers to someone harboring long-standing resentment. Yet each theory struggled to reconcile the meticulous placement of the bodies with the absence of witnesses or immediate leads. Over time, speculative and fringe ideas emerged, reflecting the community's difficulty in reconciling facts with incomprehensible loss. Some posited the involvement of organized criminal activity, suggesting that the children may have been witnesses to or incidental victims of a larger undisclosed crime. Others explored psychological motives, considering the possibility of a serial offender or an individual compelled by compulsion or delusion to target children in secluded spaces. A smaller subset of theorists invoked supernatural or ritualistic explanations, arguing that the care with which the bodies were positioned implied symbolic intent. Though unverifiable, these ideas underscore the enigmatic aura that has surrounded Stanley Park ever since. Physical evidence, or the selective absence thereof, remains central to the mystery. The children's clothing and personal items were relatively intact. Their placement beneath the trees suggested concealment, but not obliteration. Footprints and disturbed soil hinted at movement, yet investigators were unable to link them conclusively to any individual. The deliberate yet restrained nature of the crime, the combination of concealment, absence of obvious struggle, and minimal evidence left behind, continues to challenge forensic and psychological analysis. How could such a crime occur in a public space without detection? And how could it leave behind enough clues to confirm foul play, yet none sufficient to identify a suspect? Cultural memory has ensured that the Babes in the Wood murders remain present in Vancouver's collective consciousness. Newspapers of the time documented every lead and rumor, embedding the case into local history. Over the decades, books, television specials, and documentaries have revisited the crime, examining potential suspects, inconsistencies in eyewitness testimony, and broader social contexts of mid-20th century Vancouver. The case resonates because it juxtaposes innocence with violence, public spaces with private horror, and the apparent safety of urban life with the lurking potential for human cruelty. Speculative theories continue to proliferate. Some suggest that the children were abducted by someone outside the immediate community, exploiting the park's extensive wooded areas to remain unseen. Others focus on individuals known to law enforcement for prior offenses against children, examining patterns of movement, opportunity, and behavioral similarity. Fringe hypotheses, while unverified, ponder connections to ritualistic behavior, psychological compulsion, or even fleeting societal anomalies of the era. Each theory illuminates aspects of the crime while leaving the core mystery intact. The Babes in the Wood case also highlights the tension between visibility and vulnerability. Stanley Park is a space of overlapping public and private zones. Promenades and playgrounds invite observation, while groves and wooded areas permit concealment. This duality renders the park a microcosm for understanding the broader nature of crime. Violence can occur where oversight is assumed, and ordinary spaces can conceal extraordinary malevolence. How do investigators, families, and communities respond when the ordinary becomes the site of incomprehensible tragedy? Even decades later, the psychological and cultural impact of the murders lingers. Stanley Park continues to welcome visitors, joggers, and tourists, its trails and trees filled with the rhythms of daily life. Yet for those who know the history, every shadowed path, every quiet grove carries echoes of absence, loss, and unanswered questions. The park itself becomes a witness, maintaining both the natural order and the memory of human disruption within it. Modern investigative efforts have revisited archival records, witness statements, and forensic details, applying contemporary methods to mid-20th century evidence. Digital mapping of the park, review of historical photographs, and analysis of social networks have offered new insights but no definitive resolution. The lack of confession, physical evidence linking a perpetrator, or reliable eyewitness accounts ensures that the case remains open-ended. It exists as a space where fact, speculation, and memory intersect, a haunting reminder of the limits of human understanding. Reflecting on the Babes in the Wood murders, one observes recurring patterns found in other dark mysteries: the intrusion of violence into perceived safe spaces, the intersection of ordinary life and extraordinary evil, and the endurance of questions that outlast human memory. How do communities reconcile with events that defy rational explanation? How do families navigate grief compounded by ambiguity? And perhaps most unsettling, what invisible forces, human or otherwise, can disrupt lives in ways that leave behind both certainty of loss and uncertainty of cause? The Babes in the Wood murders endure not only as a historical case, but as a lens into human vulnerability, societal perception, and the complex interplay of environment and crime. Like Anjikuni Lake, the Beaumont Children, and the Springfield Three, this tragedy reminds us that even spaces of light, beauty, and daily activity can harbor shadows. Even within the canopy of Stanley Park, where sunlight filters through the evergreens and city sounds echo faintly across paths, the silence of the victims remains palpable, demanding attention, reflection, and remembrance. And so the question endures: who was responsible for the deaths of Joan Lawson and June Callahan, and why? Was it a calculated act by a predator who knew the children, or a stranger acting on impulse? Could it have been part of a larger, unrecorded pattern of crime, or an isolated incident shaped by circumstance and opportunity? Like so many of history's darkest mysteries, the answers elude us, leaving only evidence, memory, and the unsettling realization that the boundaries between safety and danger are far thinner than we often believe. Their story, unresolved and haunting, remains a reminder that even amid beauty and familiarity, darkness can intrude, and questions may linger forever. From the shadowed groves of Stanley Park, where innocence met unspeakable violence, our exploration now drifts across the North Sea to a remote, windswept outpost on the western edge of Scotland. Here lies Eilean Lighthouse, perched on a jagged island amid treacherous waters, a solitary sentinel against the waves. The lighthouse, standing tall against the relentless storm, is a beacon of safety for sailors. But in March of 1900, it became the center of one of Britain's most perplexing and chilling maritime mysteries: the disappearance of its entire three-man crew, leaving behind only the cold lighthouse, untouched provisions, and questions that continue to haunt the imagination. Eilean Moor itself is a stark, forbidding place. The island rises sharply from the North Sea, its cliffs battered by wind and surf, its rocky terrain offering little in the way of shelter beyond the lighthouse itself. Access is difficult even in calm weather. Jagged rocks and swirling currents make approach by boat perilous. The lighthouse was a solitary outpost in every sense, a vital structure for maritime safety, yet physically and psychologically isolated, requiring its keepers to endure months of solitude, storms, and long nights with only each other for company. On March 26, 1900, the relief vessel arrived at the island to check on the keepers, who had been stationed there for several weeks. What greeted the crew was a scene that defied rational expectation. The lighthouse was intact, the doors secured, and the interior orderly. Beds had been slept in, meals prepared, and clocks and instruments maintained. Yet no one was inside. The three keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, had vanished without a trace. No footprints led away from the lighthouse, no signs of struggle marred the floors, and no evidence suggested that the men had departed willingly. Only the wind, the waves, and the desolate island remained. The initial investigation attempted to reconcile the facts with human error, misadventure, or accident. Could a storm have swept the men away? The lighthouse, though battered by wind and spray, had remained structurally sound with no evidence of flooding or collapse. Could they have fallen while tending to the exterior or been struck by rogue waves along the cliffs? Even with this theory, the absence of bodies or personal belongings beyond the lighthouse itself raised questions. In such a confined and closely observed environment, could 3 men disappear entirely without a trace? Local authorities considered more prosaic explanations. Perhaps the men had left the island to retrieve supplies or to signal passing ships, only to meet with an accident on the jagged shoreline. Perhaps they had been taken by forces unknown, pirates, smugglers, or criminals operating along the coast. Yet the remote location, the timing, and the absence of any corroborating evidence made these theories tenuous. Investigators found the lighthouse's interior in perfect working order. Logs were updated, lamps maintained, and no signs of disorder suggested duress or conflict. The contrast between the meticulous upkeep and the absence of human presence remains a central puzzle of the case. As years passed, speculation grew. Maritime historians and lighthouse enthusiasts examined the possibility of natural phenomena: rogue waves, sudden rockfalls, or even unusual tidal surges that might have carried the men into the sea. Others looked to human factors. Did interpersonal conflict, psychological strain, or even mental illness contribute to a sudden and collective decision to leave, or a tragic accident compounded by misjudgment? Each hypothesis is grounded in plausibility, yet ultimately fails to account for the total disappearance, the lack of remains, and the absence of personal items that would normally accompany such an event. Over time, more extraordinary theories took root, illustrating both the imagination and unease inspired by the isolation of Eilean Moor. Some authors proposed abduction by unknown parties, perhaps for ransom or coercion, though no evidence supported such claims. Others suggested maritime or military secrets, that the lighthouse keepers had witnessed events along shipping routes or naval operations and were removed to preserve secrecy. Fringe interpretations even venture into the supernatural, that the island itself, surrounded by swirling currents and ceaseless wind, exerted an influence that drew the men away or into danger beyond ordinary comprehension. While speculative, these theories reveal the depth of fascination inspired by the case and the human desire to reconcile inexplicable absence with narrative. What makes the Eilean Moor disappearance particularly compelling is the combination of human isolation, environmental extremity, and meticulous routine. Lighthouse keepers are selected for resilience, skill, and reliability, trained to endure solitude and maintain the complex systems that protect mariners. The sudden absence of 3 such individuals challenges assumptions about human behavior in isolation, about risk assessment, and about the interplay between environment and mortality. How could men trained to survive in extreme conditions, familiar with the terrain and sea, vanish so completely without evidence of accident, foul play, or voluntary departure? Contemporary analyses have revisited historical records, weather reports, and personal accounts from the period. While the North Sea is known for its sudden storms and perilous currents, no documented events coincide precisely with the disappearance to account for total loss. Similarly, subsequent visits to the lighthouse confirmed its isolated nature, the treacherous approach, and the absence of feasible escape routes that would not leave traces. The more investigators examine the physical evidence, or lack thereof, the more the mystery deepens, leaving open questions about the confluence of human decision, environmental hazard, and unknown forces. The Eilean Moor case resonates because it reflects recurring motifs found in many enduring mysteries: the vulnerability of individuals in isolated or extreme environments, the sudden intrusion of inexplicable absence into ordinary routines, and the limits of human perception when confronted with disappearance. Like the babes in the wood, the Beaumont children, and the Villisca Axe victims, The lighthouse keepers remind us that even when procedures, skill, and foresight are exercised, events beyond comprehension can unfold, leaving only traces of life and questions that stretch across generations. The lighthouse itself continues to stand, a sentinel against the North Sea, its light sweeping across dark waters, guiding mariners safely along jagged coastlines. Yet it also bears silent witness to absence, a monument to lives once present and now missing, to human vigilance and the enduring mystery of what can vanish without trace. Visitors, historians, and maritime enthusiasts often remark on the eerie stillness of the island, the relentless wind, and the sense that something intangible persists alongside the structure, a haunting presence born not of fear alone, but of the unanswered questions that refuse to settle. Speculative reconstructions of the events vary. Some imagine a sudden accident while working on the lantern room or exterior ledges combined with misjudgment and environmental hazard. Others envision a gradual drift into psychological strain, where isolation, stress, and interpersonal tension culminated in a fatal decision. More imaginative interpretations involve extraordinary forces, alien abduction, supernatural interference, or uncharted maritime phenomena that, while improbable, reflect the human need to frame the unexplainable within narrative possibilities. Each possibility illuminates the void left by the absence of concrete answers, while underscoring the profound mystery that persists. Reflecting on Eilean Moor, one notes the stark interplay between place and human presence. The lighthouse is both a symbol of safety and a site of unresolved disappearance. Its existence underscores the precarious balance between human control and natural forces, between observation and the unseen, between solitude and vulnerability. In studying the case, one is confronted with the tension between rational explanation and the inexplicable, a reminder that even within structures designed for security and order, absence can occur in ways that challenge understanding. Even today, the island remains remote, accessed only by boat or helicopter, subject to the harsh rhythms of the sea and sky. The lighthouse continues its duty, but the story of March 1900 lingers, a quiet testament to uncertainty and human vulnerability. Researchers, writers, and curious visitors revisit the records, the logs, and the island itself, seeking insight, patterns, or any hint that might shed light on the disappearance. Yet with each revisit, the mystery seems to reaffirm its resistance to resolution, emphasizing that some events occupy a space between fact and speculation, evidence and imagination. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur vanished from Eilean Moor under mysterious circumstances, with no clear evidence of accident, foul play, or natural causes. Like other enduring disappearances, their case highlights human vulnerability, the limits of observation, and the fascination of unsolved mysteries. The lighthouse continues to operate, a beacon of safety and a silent reminder of the keeper's disappearance, symbolizing how some mysteries remain beyond human comprehension. From the windswept cliffs and lonely lighthouse of Eilean Moor, where isolation and disappearance intertwine, we now turn our gaze to the skies over southeastern Australia, to a stretch of ocean that has become synonymous with one of aviation history's most perplexing vanishing acts. On the evening of October 21st, 1978, a young pilot named Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin Airport, heading toward King Island in Bass Strait. What followed would transform an ordinary training flight into an enduring enigma, a mystery that continues to captivate, unsettle, and defy definitive explanation. The night was clear, but the air carried a tension, a subtle foreboding that would become inseparable from Valentich's final hours. Frederick, 20-year-old, ambitious, and increasingly intrigued by the unknown, piloted a Cessna 182L light aircraft across a stretch of sea that had claimed others before him in less documented circumstances. Bass Strait itself is a channel known for unpredictable weather, strong currents, and occasional turbulence. Its waters have long tested mariners, and now, on this evening, a young aviator would enter its airspace, unknowingly becoming part of a story that blends fact, speculation, and human curiosity. At 7:06 p.m., Valentich radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control. His voice, calm but tinged with excitement, relayed that an unidentified aircraft was flying above him, its lights visible in the sky. According to his transmission, the object was moving in ways that defied conventional understanding, hovering, approaching, and then receding, all while maintaining impossible speed and maneuverability. He described the craft as having a metallic surface, bright lights, and movements that seemed deliberate and intelligent. For a trained pilot, such observations were both extraordinary and precise. Yet no other aircraft were in the vicinity, and radar systems later failed to detect any additional object. As the minutes passed, Valentich's reports became increasingly urgent. He noted the strange behavior of the craft, suggesting that it was not responding to him in the way another pilot would. Then, at 7:14 p.m., communication shifted from observation to alarm. "It's hovering. It's not an aircraft. It's... The transmission was abruptly cut off, leaving air traffic control and the world with only a fragment of sound, a final haunting note suspended in time. No distress signal, no subsequent contact, no wreckage was ever found. The Cessna had vanished over Bass Strait, and with it, Frederick Valentich. Mainstream explanations initially focused on the practical, pilot disorientation, spatial illusion, or accidental crash into the sea. Valentich was a relatively inexperienced pilot, logging only a few hundred hours, and the night over Bass Strait, with its dark waters and limited visual references, could plausibly have induced vertigo or a misperception of another aircraft's lights. Investigators considered the possibility that he mistook celestial bodies, a fishing vessel, or commercial lighting for an unknown craft. Perhaps, in attempting to maneuver, he lost control, entering the unforgiving ocean below. Such theories are grounded in aviation reality, and yet they cannot fully account for the abruptness of disappearance or the absence of debris. Speculation deepened as alternative theories emerged, fueled by Valentich's own interest in UFO phenomena. He had expressed fascination with extraterrestrial life and had reportedly conducted research on unidentified flying objects. Some theorists suggest that his curiosity may have led him to misinterpret natural or human-made phenomena. Others propose more extraordinary possibilities. That Valentich encountered a craft of unknown origin, abducted or drawn into circumstances entirely outside conventional experience. Witness reports from locals in nearby towns recount strange lights in the sky that night, though none can be definitively linked to the flight. The ocean itself complicates the narrative. Bass Strait is a channel with strong currents, cold temperatures, and treacherous seabed topography. If the aircraft had crashed, recovery would have been challenging, and evidence could have been dispersed by tide and time. Yet even with these environmental considerations, the thorough search that followed, including aerial, maritime, and diving efforts, failed to yield wreckage, personal belongings, or clues that could anchor the disappearance in a conventional accident scenario. The complete absence of physical evidence intensifies the mystery, leaving space for continued speculation and unease. Psychological factors may also play a role in understanding Valentich's final moments. Pilots in solo flight over vast water are acutely aware of isolation, responsibility, and potential danger. The human mind, under stress or sensory deprivation, can interpret ambiguous stimuli in extraordinary ways. Could the young pilot's excitement and fear have amplified visual cues, transforming a mundane object into something perceived as otherworldly? Or did his observations reflect phenomena that genuinely defy conventional explanation? These questions straddle the boundary between human cognition and external reality, highlighting the complexity of unraveling mysteries that involve both perception and environment. Over the decades, conspiracy theories have flourished. Some posit government involvement, suggesting that military testing or secret aircraft might have been responsible, and that Valentich's disappearance was suppressed or misreported. Others suggest extraterrestrial abduction, citing the precision and consistency of his final radio communications. Fringe theories range from teleportation to temporal anomalies, reflecting the compelling narrative power of disappearance at the intersection of human skill, isolation, and the unknown. Each theory, regardless of plausibility, underscores the enduring fascination with events that defy closure. The Valentich case also invites reflection on the intersection of environment and vulnerability. Piloting a small aircraft over open water requires attention, skill, and with the unknown have influenced perception at the critical moment? Each question reflects both the limitations of investigation and the enduring appeal of mystery, a reminder that even in an era of advanced technology, some events evade explanation. In the vast expanse of Bass Strait, night falls, waves churn, and the horizon stretches endlessly. No trace of Frederick Valentich remains, yet his final words echo through history, a testament to human curiosity, courage, and the profound vulnerability that accompanies exploration. As investigators, historians, and observers continue to revisit the case, the tension between the known and unknown persists, a reminder that some mysteries, no matter how closely examined, retain their power to intrigue, unsettle, and inspire wonder. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich is a story of flight, isolation, and the unexplainable. It bridges ordinary life and extraordinary speculation, inviting reflection on human perception, environmental forces, and the potential for events beyond comprehension. Like the keepers of Eilean Moor, the babes in the wood, and the vanished communities of Anjikuni Lake, Valentich's story occupies the liminal space between fact and imagination, a mystery that endures because it challenges expectations, defies closure, and continues to beckon us into the unknown. And so the question remains, What truly happened over Bass Strait on that clear October night? Did Frederick Valentich succumb to accident, environmental hazards, or human error? Or was his final journey shaped by forces beyond ordinary understanding? The answers elude us, leaving only the haunting record of his final transmissions and the unending sweep of sky and sea, a reminder that some mysteries persist not because they are unsolvable, but because they exist at the intersection of human curiosity, isolation, and the profound unknown. From the vast expanse of Bass Strait, where Frederick Valentich vanished into the night sky, our journey now turns eastward, across the Pacific Ocean to the shadowed slopes of Aokigahara Forest, a dense woodland lying at the base of Mount Fuji. Known to locals as the Sea of Trees, Aokigahara is a place of quiet, dense foliage, twisted roots, and a stillness that is both mesmerizing and unsettling. It is a forest steeped in history, legend, and tragedy, a place where nature seems to amplify the human mind's darkest impulses, and where one of the most enigmatic and unsettling mysteries of modern Japan quietly persists: the Aokigahara tape mystery. The forest itself is a study in contrast. Sunlight filters through thick canopies and dappled patterns, yet the density of the trees creates long shadows, deep pockets of silence, and an atmosphere of near total isolation. Even on well-worn paths, the sounds of wind, birds, and insects can feel amplified, while human presence seems muted, absorbed by the forest itself. It is within this almost supernatural quiet that the story of the tape begins. A story that intertwines human tragedy, the unexplained, and the limits of perception. In the early 1980s, a young woman visiting Aokigahara for spiritual reflection recorded a series of audio tapes. On the surface, the tapes were innocuous, her voice narrating the forest's beauty, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of distant wildlife. Yet upon later playback, listeners reported hearing more than environmental sounds. Strange noises, whispers, indistinct voices, and low-frequency hums appeared layered beneath her narration, creating an effect that was simultaneously subtle and profoundly unsettling. Those who examined the recordings were divided. Were the sounds mere artifacts of the forest, the result of overlapping frequencies, or had the microphone captured something beyond ordinary comprehension? Mainstream explanations for the phenomena focused on environmental and technical factors. Aokigahara is rich in magnetic minerals, particularly iron, which can affect compass readings and, theoretically, electromagnetic equipment. Some researchers suggested that natural geomagnetic anomalies might interfere with audio recording devices, producing low-frequency sounds or distorted voices. Others noted the dense foliage and echoing acoustics of the forest, which could cause the human ear to perceive ordinary environmental noise as speech-like patterns. These explanations are grounded in physics and acoustics, yet they cannot fully account for the emotional resonance and uncanny clarity reported by those who listened to the tapes. Historical context adds depth to the enigma. Aokigahara has long been associated with death and spiritual significance, often referenced in folklore and literature as a place where spirits linger. By the 20th century, the forest became known tragically as a site where individuals, overwhelmed by despair, chose to end their lives. The forest's reputation amplified the unsettling nature of the recordings. Whispers and low hums in an isolated, historically laden environment are not merely technical anomalies. They become symbols of presence, loss, and unanswered questions. Could the tapes have captured something tied to the forest's darker history? Or are we witnessing a psychological phenomenon intensified by cultural memory and expectation? Speculative theories proliferated in response. Some posited that the recordings were evidence of residual consciousness or spiritual energy, ghostly traces of those who had previously perished in the forest. Others argued for more psychological explanations, that listeners' expectations, fears, and cultural associations shaped perception, creating the sense of voices or movement where none objectively existed. Fringe interpretations went further, suggesting that the tapes might capture phenomena as yet unexplained by modern science, possibly electromagnetic or dimensional in nature. These hypotheses, while unverifiable, underscore the profound intersection between environment, human perception, and the unknown. Investigators and audio experts attempted to analyze the tapes scientifically. Sound spectrograms revealed patterns resembling human speech, yet the language was indiscernible, phonetically ambiguous, or overlapping with background noise. Attempts to replicate the phenomenon in the forest using similar equipment yielded inconsistent results. Some recordings produced strange distortions, while others remained silent. The inconsistency itself became part of the mystery, highlighting the difficulty of separating human expectation from empirical observation. Could the forest itself create sounds that mimic consciousness? Or does the human mind project intention onto random stimuli? The Aokigahara tape mystery also illustrates the role of narrative in shaping our understanding of unexplained events. Media coverage of the forest's tragic history, combined with accounts of unusual occurrences on the tapes, contributed to a cultural narrative in which the forest is both a physical and psychological labyrinth. Visitors report feelings of unease, disorientation, and heightened sensitivity to sound. For those entering the forest, every creak, gust of wind, and rustle of foliage can carry profound meaning, intensified by historical knowledge and personal expectation. In this sense, the tapes are not simply recordings. They are invitations to consider the interplay of perception, environment, and meaning in extreme isolation. Over time, the mystery has persisted because it resists conventional resolution. Unlike missing persons cases or tangible criminal acts, the tapes provide evidence that is simultaneously real and ambiguous. The sounds exist, yet their origin is unclear. The forest is real, yet its interpretive power extends beyond measurable phenomena. Researchers, audiophiles, and paranormal enthusiasts continue to debate whether the recordings represent environmental anomalies, technological artifacts, or traces of something unexplainable. Each listening raises new questions, and the more one engages with the tapes, the deeper the forest's layered presence seems to grow. Psychological dimensions further complicate the narrative. The human mind is highly sensitive to pattern recognition, particularly in auditory perception. In contexts of isolation or heightened emotion, ordinary sounds can be interpreted as voices or intentional signals. In Aokigahara, these tendencies are magnified by the forest's density, the historical weight of tragedy, and the expectation of encountering the uncanny. Yet listeners consistently report a sense of intelligence or deliberation in the sounds, a feeling that goes beyond simple auditory illusion. What mechanism could produce such an effect, and why does it resonate so deeply with human consciousness? Modern technology has offered some avenues for investigation. Digital analysis, spectral filtering, and waveform reconstruction provide detailed insight into the tape's audio properties, isolating frequencies and separating layers of sound. Yet even with sophisticated tools, no definitive explanation has emerged. The phenomena remain partially ambiguous, straddling the line between verifiable physical causation and subjective perception. This tension, between measurable reality and human interpretation, is central to the enduring fascination with the Aokigahara tapes. Beyond technical considerations, the case challenges us to confront larger questions about environment, human psychology, and the unknown. What does it mean to encounter unexplained phenomena in a place already marked by historical trauma? How do expectation, fear, and narrative shape perception in extreme or isolated locations? And to what extent can we trust empirical analysis when the human experience of mystery is shaped as much by mind and culture as by material reality? The tapes do not provide answers. They provoke reflection on these enduring questions. Aokigahara, in its dense, quiet, and layered history, serves as both stage and participant in the mystery. The tapes, recorded decades ago, remain a bridge between past and present, reality and interpretation. Even as technology improves and more sophisticated methods are applied, the forest continues to assert its inscrutability, revealing how environment, culture, and perception intersect to produce events that resist closure. The whispers on the tapes, faint or pronounced, invite listeners to confront both the tangible and the intangible, the documented and the elusive. As one contemplates the Aokigahara tape mystery, the forest itself becomes a mirror for human curiosity and fear. Each sound, each pause, each distorted voice prompts reflection on what is real and what is perceived. Like the vanished keepers of Eilean Moor, Frederick Valentich over Bass Strait, and the babes in the wood, this case emphasizes how ordinary locations can harbor extraordinary mysteries, and how human perception can transform subtle stimuli into events of profound significance. And so the question endures: what truly exists in the recordings captured among Aokigahara's trees? Are they merely artifacts of the environment and technology, reflections of expectation and the mind's interpretive power, or traces of something beyond ordinary comprehension? The forest keeps its silence, the tapes remain, and the mystery persists. A quiet but persistent reminder that even in modern times, some phenomena elude explanation, demanding curiosity, reflection, and the acknowledgement that the unknown is often closer and more profound than we dare to imagine. From the shadowed woods of Aokigahara, where the stillness of the forest transforms subtle sounds into haunting presences, we return to the frozen slopes of the northern Ural Mountains, where one of history's most chilling and enigmatic expeditions unfolded, the ill-fated trek of the Dyatlov Pass hikers. The incident has long fascinated researchers, not only because of the mysterious deaths themselves, but also because of the unsettling anomalies surrounding their equipment, particularly the radios carried by the hikers. These devices, intended as tools for connection and safety, may hold clues to a deeper, less tangible aspect of the tragedy. The landscape is stark, even by Siberian standards. Snow blankets jagged peaks, while high winds scour the slopes, creating eerie drifts and snow formations that conceal crevices, cliffs, and treacherous ice fields. The hiker's route cut through this inhospitable terrain, where the air is thin, the cold relentless, and the night stretches into seemingly infinite darkness. Radios, small but essential pieces of equipment, were their link to the outside world, capable of conveying both routine messages and urgent distress signals. In the aftermath of the expedition, investigators found that these devices exhibited anomalies that continue to provoke speculation. Among the items recovered from the campsite were several shortwave radios, some of which appeared damaged, others functional, yet none had recorded transmissions consistent with the final hours of the hikers. Curious patterns emerged. One radio, in particular, seemed to emit intermittent bursts of static and unidentifiable signals. Technical inspection revealed that batteries were not fully depleted, yet the equipment had ceased transmitting at critical moments. Did these anomalies reflect environmental interference, mechanical failure, or something more inexplicable? The question lingers unresolved, like footprints lost in a fresh snowfall. Experts in radio operation and atmospheric science point to several possible explanations. The northern Urals experience intense geomagnetic activity, particularly during winter months when solar winds interact with the magnetosphere. These conditions can create unpredictable interference in radio waves, producing static, fading signals, or sudden blackouts. Temperature extremes can also affect battery performance and circuitry, particularly in older equipment, potentially causing malfunctions or intermittent transmissions. Even so, the anomalies recorded at Dyatlov Pass remain unusual. They coincide not only with the last known period of activity, but also with the moment the hikers appeared to abandon their tent in a state of extreme urgency, leaving clothing and equipment behind. Some investigators suggest that the irregular radio behavior may reflect a combination of human and environmental factors. Could a sudden panic, triggered by an unknown threat, have caused the hikers to abandon proper radio protocol? Did they attempt to transmit distress signals that were subsequently distorted or lost in the atmospheric conditions of the region? The evidence is fragmentary, and the forest and mountain of the Ural North complicate attempts at reconstruction. Radio signals may travel erratically over snow, ice, and mountainous terrain, bending or reflecting in ways that interfere with clarity. Yet, while these technical explanations are plausible, they do not fully account for the perceived irregularities or the eerie timing of the anomalies. Beyond technical and environmental explanations, speculation has extended into more unusual territory. Some researchers posit that the hikers may have encountered atmospheric phenomena, such as katabatic winds, infrasound waves, or even rare electrical discharges that interfered with both perception and equipment. Others consider the possibility of secret military testing in the region. During the late 1950s, the Soviet Union conducted experiments in nuclear and radar technologies, some of which could conceivably generate electromagnetic disturbances capable of disrupting shortwave radios and affecting human cognition. While evidence for direct military involvement is lacking, the proximity of testing sites and reports of unusual lights in the sky during that period have fueled ongoing debate. The Dyatlov Pass radio anomalies also invite psychological consideration. Hikers under extreme stress, facing sub-zero temperatures and disorienting whiteouts, may experience perceptual distortions, misjudgments of distance, and cognitive interference. Could fear or hypothermia have contributed to mismanagement of radio equipment, misinterpretation of signals, or delayed attempts to transmit? The interplay between human vulnerability and technological uncertainty highlights a central tension in the case. Even the tools designed to preserve life can become opaque or unreliable in extreme circumstances. Audio specialists analyzing recovered recordings from the expedition noted irregular bursts that do not align with conventional Morse code, known frequencies, or identifiable signals. Some bursts were rhythmic, while others fluctuated in intensity, creating the impression of purposeful modulation. Critics argue these patterns are coincidental, artifacts of magnetic interference, or distortions from equipment damage. Advocates for more extraordinary interpretations suggest that the signals might have been influenced by unknown or unrecorded sources, anomalous electromagnetic phenomena, atmospheric anomalies, or even interactions with uncharted auroral activity. Each possibility deepens the sense that the Dyatlov Pass tragedy is as much a story of mystery as it is of mortality. Historical context intensifies the intrigue. The hikers were experienced, trained in survival, skiing, and mountaineering. Their meticulous preparations included specialized equipment, including the radios, intended to ensure safety and communication. That these devices exhibited anomalies precisely during the climactic period of distress amplifies their significance. It is not merely that the radios failed, it is that they failed under conditions and at a time that align with the hikers' sudden, unexplained decision to leave the tent and confront unknown danger. Could a perfectly timed environmental interference have coincided with human panic? Or does the synchronization suggest something beyond coincidence, a puzzle in which cause and effect remain obscured? Over decades, numerous theories have emerged, some grounded in physics, others in speculation. Avalanches, sudden snowslides, katabatic winds, and infrasound exposure can all produce disorientation, tremors, and abnormal auditory perception. In such contexts, radios might behave unpredictably, particularly if batteries are cold, contacts corroded, or aerials misaligned. Yet these theories, while plausible, fail to explain the complete absence of distress signals, the orderly state of certain equipment, and the strange, intermittent bursts recovered from the surviving devices. The anomalies remain a focal point, a technical puzzle wrapped in human tragedy. The Dyatlov Pass radio anomalies serve as a reminder that mysteries often exist at the intersection of human perception, environmental extremity, and technological limitation. Equipment designed for connection, designed to bridge isolation, can, under certain conditions, produce confusion or mislead. The juxtaposition of the known and the unknown, the audible and the imperceptible, creates a narrative space in which both ordinary and extraordinary explanations coexist. It is here, in this liminal zone, that the Dyatlov Pass story continues to captivate, encouraging careful investigation and cautious imagination. Contemplating the anomalies, one must also consider the broader implications for understanding the case. How much did the unreliability of communication equipment influence the hikers' decisions? Did perceived interference compound fear, leading to the tense sudden abandonment? Could signals that appear inexplicable to modern investigators have been understandable under the environmental and technological context of the late 1950s? Each question underscores the interplay between human cognition, technological mediation, and extreme natural forces. Even today, researchers revisit the site, equipment schematics, and meteorological records to reconstruct possible scenarios. Advanced modeling of radio wave propagation in snowy, mountainous terrain provides insight into how signals might fluctuate or fade. Yet no reconstruction fully reproduces the precise patterns of bursts, static, or silence documented in the original devices. The anomalies continue to provoke thought and speculation, reminding us that not all mysteries are contained in physical evidence. Some reside in patterns, timing, and the space between observation and comprehension. The Dyatlov Pass radio anomalies, like the Aokigahara tapes and the vanished Cessna of Frederick Valentich, illustrate the fragile line between knowledge and uncertainty. Devices intended to record, to communicate, and to preserve life became elements of the enigma, amplifying questions even as they were meant to provide clarity. The interplay of human experience, environmental extremity, and technological imperfection generates a mystery that is at once tangible and intangible, one that invites reflection on the limits of understanding in extreme circumstances. And so, the question endures: what exactly transpired with the Dyatlov Pass radios? Were the anomalies the result of environmental interference, human error, or mechanical failure? Or did they reflect forces, known or unknown, that remain beyond conventional scientific understanding? The unexplained events in the northern Urals remind us that isolation, harsh environments, and sudden disasters can leave mysteries that defy explanation, leaving hidden truths in the frozen silence.